Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku actually married a Yakuza boss? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku was forced to awake due to the vomit that was swirling in his stomach ready to come out. Groaning as he sat up in his oddly more comfortable and bigger bed, yawning and stretching as he sluggishly got up to head to the restroom, abandoning the blanket that was hiding his ND body. As he went into the dark bathroom, not need to turn on the light as the huge window from the bedroom lit it just right enough for him to see where to pee. As he stood there releasing his urine, he smacked his lips as he hummed in the feeling of vomit and began to calm down as his mind began catching up on his surroundings. The bathroom was bigger than his dorm bathroom and looked fancier. Furrowing his brows as he felt his brain start to work, he walked out of the bathroom after washing hands to realize he was but naked in some expensive condo. It was huge, with large windows, and had a sort of dark design with dark painted walls and modern furniture. Izuku looked around to see that the bed he had slept in was indeed bigger and comfier with fur blankets and a fluffy comforter. He noticed very quickly his clothes were nicely folded on the nightstand and lunged for his clothes to get flustered. He looked at his watch to see it was 1 hour till his class began. "Sheet, where's my phone?" Izuku murmured, running his hand through his green curls as he turned in circles as he put on his white shirt and jean jacket as decided to wear his pants last to look for his phone first. Already confirmed the phone was not in the pockets. He flushed seeing he had what looked to be a mark in between his thighs, not like a mosquito bite, it was like an actual human bite him there and on his chest and probably on his neck, but he chose not to think much about it as his head was still hurting and he felt like he was going to throw up. He could not be late for his college class and he did not want to meet the stranger who had taken his virginity. So patting his jeans pockets as he then lifted the blankets on the bed to look for his phone, only to be met with a sight that took his breath away with fear and awe as his heartbeat saw what looked to be a god. He saw a peaceful older man with fair skin complexion with ripped abs as a dragon tattoo covered his upper pecs, shoulders, and arms as he seemed to be cuddling a pillow. He had a jawline that looked like it could cut cheese and his neck had a hickey, making Izuku wonder if he had done that as his hand brushed against where he felt a hickey was burning on his neck. The man was handsome, and Izuku could not help but feel like he was going to drool seeing him. He was so tough looking yet looked so peaceful and blissful in his sleep. Izuku's eyes followed the man's abs. He was more buff than Izuku and had a stronger build but was not like some tall buff guy, but he was not average either. And Izuku's eyes could notice the blanket covering the man's massive prize, which could be morning wood, but still, it was probably way bigger than Izuku had seen in his pawn vids. Izuku shook his head to keep his mind from straying away as he noticed the pillow the older man, who was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, was hugging was on top of Izuku's phone, which was poking out. Izuku slowly removed his phone as the man stayed peacefully asleep. Izuku flushed as he put the blanket down. Now that he had known there was a presence of the handsome man, he did not want to make much noise as he pulled up his kachi pants and buckled his belt as he walked slowly to the leather couches to put on his shoes as he looked on his phone to see he had zero connection. Cursing silently, he got up and began walking to the bedroom door to look back at the still sleepful man covered under the fur blanket and huge dark gray comforter. Izuku felt a small voice tell him to not go, but he only closed the door and ran to the front door without looking back as a small pint of guilt hit his heart. Barely making it to his class, he was soon able to finally return to his dorm room where he could plop on his bed. It was not like the hot guy's bed at all, it was like sleeping on books or bricks. Sighing, Izuku rubbed his head. He no longer got his head pounding and he had already thrown up his vomit after he had run down a street to catch a bus. So sorry to the old bus driver who saw him vomit in the side before hopping in. He needed to focus solely on his classes. He wanted to be a surgeon and did not want to disappoint his mentor who helped train him so far. So he was sort of in but for leaving the guy, but he had school, the future, the dream, and no accidental mistake was going to hold him back. So he mentally took note of avoiding drinking too much again. Rolling over as he planned to nap before going to his part-time job, he felt something poke his Panic went through him as he remembered the All Might keychain that he could have carelessly put in his back pocket might be what he was currently laying on, and sat up and put his hand in to pull it out. Only, it was not his Dr. All Might limited edition Silver Age keychain. It was a gold ring with the carved words, Deku. "Are you sure?" Midoriya asked, entirely confused. "I was with a man. Have you seen him? He had ash-blonde spiky hair? He was well built." "I am sorry, sir, but there is no one else beside you who was said to have checked in, under the name Deku." The lady at the receptionist's desk said as she showed him that he did write in his handwriting a sloppy Deku. But the payment was in cash. Izuku was happy he was the one not paying, but the fact he could get in trouble for a theft he did not do was something he did not want. He would never steal or even hurt a fly, so the ring must have been misplaced or something causing it to fall in his pocket. Weren't there cameras? Izuku asked desperately. He was sweating bullets and he could care less if people looked at him funny. He was probably going to go to jail because of this mysterious man, and he could end up losing all the hard work he put in to get accepted into his university. He never ran so far and fast in his life, but he was not going to be pulled into some marriage problem being the sideman that the husband effed on a nightstand. Nor did he want to be the guy who is the slut who effed a married man. The woman shook her head. She looked cute with her slightly messy sideburns and her sharp yellow eyes. But she kind of looked scary too with her two sharp teeth. "We had them off yesterday due to an electrical problem. If it would help, I can keep the ring and return it to the owner if they return." Izuku nodded and quickly handed her the ring. He was not keeping it. It felt like a weight of guilt that burned in his hand, and he would be more than happy to leave it with a stranger. "Yes. Thank you so much." Izuku left happily and was a bit scared. What if he ruined someone's marriage? What if the woman married to the man loved him and was heartbroken? Could he be the mistress in those romance shows his mother would watch that ruin their life? He shook his head and slapped his cheeks red with both his hands as he walked through the streets. No, he was not going to think any more on this. He needed to get back to his dorm and study, and what happened to that man and that beautiful ring is none of his business. Meanwhile, the woman at the receptionist's desk smirked at the ring as she tucked it into her pocket, knowing a good person not far away would pay a lot of money for a nice piece of jewelry like this. Adjusting her uniform as she looked through her blonde bangs, she smiled sweetly as another customer came to check in. After work, she will go sell the ring to the guy before heading home. Izuku would be lying if he said he had stopped thinking of the man and the ring. He would study and find himself daydreaming about the handsome man. But then he would remember the ring that pinged his heart with guilt. He would try to eat, but then the guilt would punch him in the gut of the thought of him being the reason for a family being torn apart. Then he would be trying to sleep, but the handsome man's face would jolt him awake with morning wood. And guilt would set as he would lay there in shame. Izuku only met the guy for a moment, yet he remembered every detail of the man's face and hair. The ash-blonde, spiky, fair-skinned man Deku hunted him. Yet he did not know what his eye color was. Maybe he had blue eyes. Or green. Izuku liked green despite his favorite color being red. Red eyes were rare, but Izuku thought he could have brown eyes, they were most common. Or maybe he had hazel eyes. Izuku would think of things like that with the mysterious man. He was rich and higher class, so Izuku just asking around would probably result in him being seen as some lower class kid trying to get with someone rich for money. He could not go any further cause Hone, the man who was married. 2, going to the cops could ruin his reputation, and 3, running into a rich man might sue him for being accused of theft and could ruin his life. Izuku was at a public library working on his assignments early as he found himself pondering about the man yet again as he shook himself free of the thought and went back to typing and looking over the book. He was going to continue working when his hunger shook his focus. Groaning, he begrudgingly stood up to go get something from the vending machine, leaving his book and laptop. The vending machine was not far, and even though gangs and thugs were rumored to be increasing, he doubts anyone would want a cheap laptop that was on the brink of breaking on him. Izuku put $1.25 as he then punched in the numbers to get a small snack of a granola bar. There were chips and other options, but loud food would give him attention in the quiet library despite it being empty, with only a couple of other people who were reading, studying, or even sleeping. He hummed, walking back to his table to see a note was placed on his laptop. Confused, he thought it was the wind blowing his papers till he picked them up to read. It was in another language or something cause he could not make out what it was saying. Izuku, rightfully confused, simply shrugged and put the paper in his pocket and looked at his watch. He needed to head to the dorm to help Ito with his project. Then he needed to work on his dorm. It needed to be cleaned up since he now can get a nice new mattress thanks to his part-time job. Izuku was working late at the cafe alone. Today was his day off, but he found out the manager was planning on putting Tsuyu, so he chose to step in to avoid Tsuyu having to walk to her dorm alone at night. So he was more than willing to take her to shift in trade to miss his first night with his new comfortable mattress. He was going to get out at 10 p.m., which was not far but meant a little less sleep. Sighing, he waited and waited for a customer to come in. It was dead silent and nothing but his mind to keep him occupied. He was thinking of the past few days of his repeated try to forget the man, yet nothing worked. He still remembered the handsome man's face, the man's skin, the man's tattoos, and the man's alluring bourbon cologne. Izuku could practically smell it. Shaking his head, he slapped his cheeks. He was a married man. And Izuku was not going to be a mistress or think about a man who was cheating. Izuku nodded and decided he needed to aggressively clean the tables and mop the floors. He was about to go mop when the doorbell dinged, catching his attention. Looking, he smiled at the customer. "Hello, sir. May I take your order tonight?" Izuku said cheerfully and hiding his tiredness well. The man had spiky red hair that was gelled a lot to be pointed up and spiky, with a scar on his upper eye below his brow on the right side of his face. He was tall, bulky, and intimidating if it were not for his welcoming smile that revealed sharp teeth. He was almost as handsome as the man Izuku had just been thinking about. Izuku was not scared, however, as he knew a classmate who was mistaken for intimidating and who was a generally nice person who was misunderstood. Hello. The man said a bit too loud, but from telling his accent he was a foreigner, so Izuku smiled at the man who seemed to bashfully try and decide what to order. "Your black coffee?" he said as Izuku almost released a laugh, but he held it in. It would make the man think he was being rude. Accents were just so interesting to Izuku. Izuku got his coffee, the man paid, and then took his cup to sit in the corner of the cafe. Izuku merely shrugged and went on working. Judging from the man's tux, he was from an office job, so he was not scared. He would have been before with all the gangs coming up in the city, but surprisingly the past few weeks seemed clear near his work and dorm. He went on with his work by cleaning and finishing up his shift, unaware of the predatory eyes the man was giving as he watched the young man work, oblivious. Please, you have to believe me," the girl begged, voice cracking from the lack of water and yelling, as blood spilled from her nose as the side of her face swelled. From the ruthless beating. Hands bound behind her back as her one not broken leg tried to let her get off her side. Toga Himiko was not a saint, and she was known to steal and even attack powerful men or women for some quick bank. But today, when she was leaving her shift, she was pounced on and taken to a warehouse where she was relentlessly beaten and questioned for an item she did not steal, well, more like was given. She was part of a gang that he took her in after she ran from her overly religious parents to the city to live her dream to be an actress. Only to end up on the streets being hit with reality to learn life was not as she would have thought it would have gone. The ganga Shigaraki took her in was not perfect, but it was where she was happy being herself and no one judged her for her weird kinks. She was only going on her daily routine, selling what she found was left behind in penthouses that rich customers would never notice nor care about as they have the money to get a new one easily. "You stole from the boss's wife, little lady." The man who had broken her leg sneered as they pushed their leg onto her broken leg, making her wail. The man was unrecognizable as the light was burning her eyes to only see two men figures and a female figure with curly hair. Her one good eye was barely able to see anything aside from the blunt pipe, bat, and knuckle rings that hit her. I swear. I did not do it." Fish. Another hit her stomach, cutting her off as blood and barf came from her mouth onto the concrete ground. Some of the men groaned as the female only giggled, making her churn. Usually in her line of work she had some mercy, stabbing a bit before almost killing them and laughing, but this was like they were playing with their food. They were insane, brutally hitting her, and even when they broke her leg there was no ounce of compassion. The man who did it even said that her slender leg reminded him of a chicken bone. Catching her breath as she gagged at the smell of barf, she decided to cave. Screw it. She wanted to get out of here before these psychos got an idea to break her face. I have no idea. What I stole. She yelled, huffing. I will tell you. Please just stop. There was silence, only with her breathing as she slumped to her side next to her barf as her vision began to get worse with the pounding in her head. Her hair was a mess and she felt so cold. She was splashed with cold water from when a rag was on her face when she woke up. She just wanted to go home. Screw it if she rats out some person, as long as she gets the hell out of here. The ring. She lifted her head a bit at the new voice. It was husky, deeper than the others. His voice was alluring yet terrifying. If she was not in her current position, she would say it was Cece. You stole a ring from my darling. He finished. Unable to see where the man was, she began to continue to blab. The ring was easy to remember despite how many times she stole from the rooms she cleaned for the people. The young man who gave it to her was good-looking and resembled her ex-boyfriend. God damn it. Was she going to die for some piece of metal? This BSD has a lot of cash, so he could have bought his wife a new ring. God damn it. Nothing was going right. First, she lost her wallet with her ID, now she was going to die. All 'cause a rich BSDRD's ring. I am so sorry, she begged out of breath. If I had known, I would have never done it. Please spare me. I have a family. I have parents waiting for me. Silence surrounded her as she held back her tears. She began doing one thing she never would have done, praying to be free, that she would be a better person if she got out of here, move back with her religious parents and go to church every Sunday, stop stealing or attacking innocent people, anything. I'm done playing with this beach. The voice spat as a chair sounded as if someone stood up, making her flinch. Sir, shall we let her go? A man with a deep voice said cheerfully, making her less tense as hope hit her. She was going to be let go? That I will do that. The voice said as she felt a smile grow on her face. She was free. She was free. Screw her promises, she will just go to a few friends to get this BSRD, a taste of his own medicine. She was not sorry at all. A sound of a metal dragging on concrete broke her from her thoughts as she used her one nun-swollen eye to see her worst fear. Her heart sank and cold blood rose to her face. The person walking towards her was none other than the #1 underground criminal, with a metal bat with spikes wrapped sound. It dragged on the ground, shirtless to reveal the trademark on his upper muscular body, dragon tattoos. Before she could form any words or any more thoughts, he swung his bat. Izuka did not know what to say about his week so far. Well, oddly good is what he could say. Everything was going great for him. He got higher pay at his part-time job on Monday. Tuesday he passed his test for his college class. This was amazing since English was a huge struggle for him, and for him to pass the huge essay helped him out with his grade that could have cost him to lose the money the school was giving him for federal aid. Speaking of which, he found a $20 bill on the ground when he was craving some fast food on Wednesday also. Which was perfect as Thursday was his day off, which made him sad that he had class Friday today. Until the teacher put a last-minute notice that there was no class today. And sure, a loud celebration today for a rally for the football team nearby his dorm, but he's used to it at this point. Sure, Izuku would be upset if the teacher called off class for a minute, but Izuku was not far from his dorm room, so he happily skipped back so he could take a nap before he started his shift. Ida and Ochako passed by him. Ida scolded him for needing to study in his free time, while Ochako, his girlfriend, sighed in jealousy. Uruwaka and Ida were his best friends from high school and were the definition of a healthy relationship. Hell, if Izuka did not know them, he would think they were an elderly married couple stuck in two young adults. Ida kept Ochako grounded, and Ochako helped him learn to have once in a while instead of being so uptight. The two were responsible, kind-hearted, and loyal, so it was no surprise the two were dating. Izuka thought they were dating already, but Ida and her immediately told him when they did, cause Ida and her both would never hide things they are proud of and like. They still do their first kiss anniversary every year along with when they began dating, and when the two did their first couple things. But the two still do their things and hobbies. And very rarely do they get jealous, as the two had such a great stable relationship. That 0.1% jealousy is mostly Ida with Ochako and her sweets while Ochako is with Ida and his tidiness. They fought for sure but both would apologize and talk it out immediately. Izuku wished he could have such a happy relationship. He sighed as he continued on his way to his dorm, passing the crowded halls, passing through people, which was frustrating as there were both overly perfumed young ladies, sweaty jocks, loud conversations, yelling and howling. Well, the dorms were mainly young adults or adult children. Izuku mainly found silence when there were finals where everyone was studying, sleeping, and crying. Yes, it's okay to cry, but at night where no one can hear you, please. When he got to his floor, it was surprisingly empty. Izuku was close to his room when he noticed someone standing by his door. Hurrying over, he saw that a yellow-haired man was close to his height, slightly taller, with a black bolt on the side, drinking a soda, humming as he heard rummaging in his room. Immediately feeling every member in his body set off red flags, he bolted to go inside his room before he was grabbed by the arm. "Hold on, bud," the man said, but not in a threatening tone. It was like something a cool friend would say. But Izuku was upset. These people were touching his stuff and putting them in boxes. "This is my room. You can't take my stuff." Izuku yelled he needed to be loud so it could get attention. Only he heard the loud blaring music downstairs. Was there a party? "Your room," the man murmured and then used his free hand, as the other still grasped Izuku's arm as he glared at the yellow-haired man who was surprisingly stronger than he looked, to pull out some paper to think for a moment to then look back at Izuku to then have a welcoming smile. "Ah, Midoriya," he said. It made chills run down Izuku's spine. "Kaken sent us to pick you up." Izuku immediately furrowed his brow at Kaken? Who the f was that? Still, Izuku began to feel more unsafe in the situation. Pulling his arm free, startling the man by throwing his backpack at him in full strength at the same time as he then bolted through the hall, deciding to jump from the window instead of the stair, which was risky and never should be attempted, but Izuku was high on adrenaline and wanted to notify the authorities. And he was about to be kidnapped by a bunch of weirdos. Besides, it was not too far from the ground, and luckily there was a pile of leaves as he landed on the crunchy, itchy pile to then stand up and bolt again as his mind constantly told him to run and not look back, blocking out all sounds deaf to him. The security was not far. He could make it. The airing horn made his ears ring as some people were cheering for the people on stage, yelling. Confetti's shooting and shoving move him around. It was very loud and Izuku was trying to pass through quickly as he knew he was still ahead. He was happy to see he was near his destination, to his freedom. But as he ran, he suddenly was pulled back, making him feel cold blood sweep through his body like he was falling into the water. Before he could scream, something covered his vision. Kamanri groaned as he ran a hand through his hair as he sat in the car looking over at the sleeping, tied-up young man leaning on his side. He was going to lean on the window, but Kirishima said it would hurt his neck. So Kamanri seriously ran a hand through the green curls with a smug grin. "Kaken knows how to choose, huh, Kiri?" Kamanri teased. His friend Kaken was always so cold and distant to everyone, so it was a shock when he married some guy one day he just met when he was drunk. Kirishima and Kamanri thought he would just do the legal option of divorcing it and return the rings, ending it at that. But of course, Bakugu Kastuki was a Bakugu and did the unbelievable and refused to do the logical thing and chose to stay married to the mysterious person, claiming he never made mistakes and did it for a reason. Whatever that meant. "Dude, stop, you know Bakugu will be said with you touching him like that." Kirishima slapped his hand away from the cute sleeping Deku, who snuggled closer to Kamanri for warmth. "Relax, I'm into women, besides Bakugu is going to have him all to himself soon," Kamari said simply as he did stop running his hands through the curls, not without commenting on how soft it was. "Wonder what shampoo he uses." "Come on, dude," Kirishima said as he made Deku get off him and lean towards him instead. "You need to stop doing that, Bakubro will be said again." Kamanri finally caved to his nagging and stopped, but not without comment. "So you wanted him to lean on you instead? Man, you fell for our boss's wife that you watched over as they worked." Kirishima glared at him, not with the same cold eyes he did when he had handled some uncooperative people that needed to be taught a lesson or when others needed to be disciplined when either bad-mouthing the boss or going against rules. Kamanri simply rolled his eyes and huffed, looking out the car. They were going to arrive shortly so they could get the young man ready and cleaned before the boss came home and got mad that no one got his wife ready for their official dinner together. Soon they arrived at the expensive-looking building mainly reserved for the workers and the Bakugo themselves. It had high security, and despite it being near other buildings, it belonged to the Bakugo group with its uses. The difference is the one for living was red brick and the one for living was blue brick. The main building where the Bakugo worked and lived was made of metal and looked modern, and was taller, way taller, which was only a few blocks from where the two lovers met and married at the church where Bakugo's other married ex-boss Masaru Bakugo. The old boss was nothing like Bakugo. He was not for the life of the family business, but when the assassin Mistuki met him and fell for him, the two stayed in business as she took charge. No one had complaints, as those who did were quickly dealt with. This was a sweet story when in better longer detail. However, Bakugo Kastuki, their only heir and son, did not feel the same. He was against weakness and believed he was superior, and he hated his father for giving up such power of their family so easily. He never understood the reason and swore not to be like his father, which in Kamanri's mind worked, as no woman nor man wanted anything more to do with someone as arrogant, quick-tempered as Bakugo. Except for Kaminari, Kirishima, Mina, and Shiro befriended him when they saw how he truly was underneath. They thought the same till Bakugo came to save them at their darkest times. Kirishima when he was in debt, Shiro when he was a target for a gang, and Kamanri when he was mixed in the wrong crowd. Mina joined not that long ago when she was being about to be forced into PRSTTN, but luckily Kirishima was there to save her, and that was what probably sparked their little love story if Kirishima was not so shy about confessing. When they made it to the floor where Bakugo lived, it was a huge penthouse, humongous. Sure, Bakugo had other penthouses, houses, and mansions under other names like the last one he stayed with his wife. But this was his house. Sure, his main house was over in Trinidad, California, but this was his main, where he worked, planned, and had the most memories. Where Kirishima and Kamanri became friends when they covered the broken vase they knocked. Bakugo chased them when he found out when they were up one night cleaning after an assassin who failed at trying to kill Kastuki and chose to eat at McDonald's for the first time since they mostly ate high-class food Bakugo's chef made. Where Bakugo showed off his tattoo that Shiro, Kirishima, and Kamanri tried to flex their muscle to see who was more buff. Kirishima won, of course, as Bakugo came second, mainly due to Kirishima doing underground fighting to get money. So many years have passed, and now someone seems to have caught the boy's heart. It could make Kamanri cry if he could. But after going so long with torturing people and killing, you get numbed a bit. Kirishima was holding Deku over his shoulder as the three went to the bedroom the boss had been working on. From what he could recall, the two talking about the night they married. It was an average room with none of Bakugo's belongings, as most of them were trash, worn out, or broken. So they only had his backpack left with the phone that Kamanri had in his pocket. So Kirishima carefully placed Midoriya onto the bed as Kamari looked around the room. They were not allowed in it when it was in the works, until now when they were to get him ready after he tried running off. They were going to wake him, of course. The room is nice, never seen Bakugo work so hard to get this stuff, more of a Red Riot fan. Kirishima huffed as he looked around the room. It had a nice view of the city with a comfy bed and a huge shelf of the Mercy of All Might, as Bakugo said he was an All Might nerd. And also many nice clothes in the huge closet. There was, however, a lot of space for decor aside from some furniture and shelves, as the boss wanted his Deku to have his thoughts in the room. Bakugo was planning on having dinner, and then Kamanri waited for Kirishima to finish his sentence as he had no clue what Bakugo was planning to spend the rest of the evening with his wife. Dinner, yeah, then the two will dash. Kirishima was about to finish facing Kamanri, who was looking at the shelf, when in a swift movement he noticed the green-curled man move around sluggishly, awake from his slumber. "Oh, you're awake," Kirishima said as Kamanri turned around to wear a welcoming smile. "Rise and shine, Deku." Izuku was fluttering his eyes, awake as his head spun. He felt as though he was being thrown around and then placed on a soft surface. Scrunching his face as the bright lights were hitting his eyelids, making him turn over his face into the soft surface, sighing. He just wanted a few more moments of sleep. Relaxing, he then heard someone speak, but he ignored it. In the college dorms, you always hear conversations due to the thin walls, but then again these voices sounded close, barely audible to Izuku, who was beginning to slowly come to. Finally blinking, he began raising his heavier head to luck his numb dry lips as he saw two figures who looked familiar. His brain was slow right now, and anything the two were saying was death to Izuku. So he began looking around to see he was in a bigger room than what his dorm was, filled with more furniture, and looked more well-contained than his hand-down furniture or his blanket he got from Goodwill. It was very embarrassing, but he had to do a lot to save money for food and other expenses. He looked down to see he was on what looked to be the most comfortable yet expensive furniture he had the pleasure of seeing as he nuzzled into the blanket ready to sleep when his eyes popped wide open. His brain was quickly processing many facts right now. He was not in his dorm room, he was kidnapped. This was not a dream, he was alone with two older men, and he was drugged, meaning one possible outcome. Immediately the young man began yelling, scrambling away from the two men. "Get away from me!" Izuku yelled in pure fear. He was strong, sure, but he felt vulnerable at this moment. He immediately saw the yellow-haired man reach to touch him, freezing. "You dude, chill, we are with Kaken," he said in an attempt to soothe Izuku, who just looked at him with furrowed brows. "Who's Kaken? Let me go." Dash. Izuku yelled, slapping the man's hand away from him as he threw pillows at the man's face and then used his shoes, which surprisingly the men did not fight back but just raised arms to block the young man's attempts of fighting back as Izuku merely sweated bullets. "Midoriya." Izuku looked at the familiar accent to see it was Kirishima himself, the man who was now his ex-favorite customer and the ex-customer who would happily stay with him till closing. "Kaken is the man you were with that night at the Glorum bar." The silence was among them, with only heavy breathing as the once perfect luxury room was now a mess. Izuku could not help but murmur. He heard him, yet he could not help but ask. "Kaken?" The man repeated, to which the yellow-haired man stepped forward, raising a brow. "You married him?" "Husband? I don't have one. I am a college student." Izuku gasped, scandalized from what he had just heard as he flushed a deep red. "I don't think you remember." Kamanri sighed, laughing to himself, a joke only he knew about. "Or this was a mistake. Like the ring. I only returned it." Izuku explained. "They probably mistook him for his wife." His heart ached a bit that the man only slept with him for his resemblance to his wife, but knowing the power this man had over his life scared him to forget that pain. "His wife's ring was in my pocket, so I took it to the front desk." Kirishima shook his head. "No sir, you are the wife." Izuku was flabbergasted as he looked at the two, who only looked back at him in seriousness, as though they were talking to a kid whose pet died. "Chow. What? I don't even remember." Izuku stuttered, running his hands through his hair. Kirishima looked a bit unsure. Izuku felt bad for taking up their time, and he was a bit mad also. Well, at least he got some sleep in. "You were drunk," Kaminari said, nodding. "But the two of you had a really good connection, I swear," he said, sparkles in his eyes as Kirishima nodded with a thumbs up. "Yeah. Man, you two were all romantic." "We were drunk," Izuku repeated. "You didn't have SEC or anything, Baku bro isn't like that," Kirishima said, waving a hand, but Izuku thought otherwise, as he recalled the many pieces of evidence that prove otherwise. "How old is he?" Izuku said, asking the real questions. Maybe the guy was older and Izuku can use the fact he is in college. "Bakubro is 30 years old." 30 years old? Izuku practically dropped his jaw and his eyes popped out of his head as he mumbled in a panic and fear. 30? With a 10-year age difference, Izuku was fine with dating older men, sure, or the same age, yes. But he was up for a 2-year age difference at most. 10 years of holy shit. Izuku didn't know how to feel. He looked hot though, not that looks matter. But to date anyone, Izuku? A college student? How? Like, why marry me? How did this even happen? Izuku asked as he felt stress growing in him as he tried to comprehend what had happened that night so long ago. "I can sense that easily," the yellow-haired man said smugly as Izuku only looked at him questioningly. "I don't even know you, I know him," Izuku said, aimed at Kirishima, who laughed awkwardly with an apologetic smile. "Sorry," Kirishima said that Izuku forgave because the guy seemed genuinely nice. And Izuku was into redheads. Red is his favorite color. I am Kaminari Denki, he said, huffing a bit. Izuku apologized and Kamamura continued. Well, it all started like this. I and Kirishima were done cleaning up our last mission, so we thought about sneaking out to a bar to relax with our friends Mina and Siro. Izuku felt like he wanted to know what he meant by mission, but judging how he said it, it was not for Izuku to know about. Anyways, Bakugo caught us and decided to go with us because he wanted to get away from his mother for a while. Because she had been on his case to get married. And Bakugo was always against what I think is his pride. Kamanri sighed as Kirishima shook his head in shame as Izuku furrowed his brows. Weren't they supposed to tell him good things about his husband? 'Cause right now Izuku is picturing the blonde in a light as a guy who treats his mother badly and an arrogant man. Sure, some confident guys were hot, but there was a line between being confident or being an arrogant a-hole. So we were drinking when Mina and Kirishima went home early to, Kamanri wiggled his brows, which Izuku waved off as Kirishima blushed. See, can we focus on the main story? Izuku said as Kamanri signed, muttering about how he only wanted to spice it up. When I was talking to a girl, when I noticed Bakugo and you talking, suddenly you punched him in the face. Kamanri said as Izuku widened his eyes. I thought this was a romantic night of how we got married? Izuku said, scandalizing. Bro! Kirishima said, elbowing Kaminari. Now that Izuku was thinking about it, weren't these guys older than him? Yet they acted like college students more than he and his friends did. I'm getting there, Kaminari said, waving a hand at them. Then I was like, dude, what did Bakugo say this time? And, was Bakugo going to kill this man in front of these people? And stuff. But then Bakugo did not do anything, so I was like, oh, and is Bakugo mad right now? But then you two started yelling and I was about to step in when you and Bakugo started walking out. Izuku was so confused and waited for Kaminari to continue, but he just sat there in silence. And? Izuku asked, waiting for a response. That's all I saw, Kamanri said as if that was the clear answer. You said you saw our romantic chemistry or something. Izuku said as his brain thought why he wanted to know so badly, since the most logical thing in this situation was to the police for being kidnapped. We did, like when Bakugo called us to get the wedding ready. Kirishima said, shrugging. We had a wedding? In one night? Izuku yelled, not believing a word they said. Yeah, it's amazing what we could do in 3 hours when you have the money, Kaminari said, and Kirishima nodded. Izuku was about to question what they meant when a knock on the door interrupted him. Izuku practically almost jumped out of his skin, but Kirishima noticed and thankfully soothed him. It's cool, dude, it's just Siro, he said, smiling as Kaminari opened the door. Is he ready? Siro's voice sounded as if he was in a hurry for some emergency as Izuku tilted his head confused. Yeah, just a little bit, Kaminari said as he closed the door. Ready for what? Izuku asked, confused and a bit fearful as he curled up a bit into a ball. Kirishima sighed as he ran a hand through his red spiky hair that looked as though it had layers of hair gel and hairspray. Well, Bakubro wants to have dinner with his wife tonight, alone. What? Izuku steamed, making the two men wince from the volume. I just learned he was my husband. Well, you're not wrong, Kirishima murmured, nodding a bit, but Kaminari looked at him shocked. Dude, Kaminari said, slapping his arm as some sort of signal. What? Be in his shoe, Denki, what would you do in his shoes? Kirishima said with his arms and gestured to Izuku, who was still on the bed very visibly panicking. But you know Bakugo is going to have our but if dash, Kaminari said, but Kirishima only spoke up, interrupting him. Dude, how would you feel if someone just took you and you learned you were married to that one girl from the Lamar Club in Michigan? Okay, but that's different. She was creepy and tried to get me PR'd in tea, Kaminari said, rubbing his head. Bakugo is a good guy, just let the two talk. Izuku seemed to sense that if he were not to get ready, this Kakin guy would be mad at them. Yeah, he was nervous, but he did not want anyone to get in some sort of trouble because of him. And from how the two acted, they seemed like generally good people. They did not seem like those criminals in movies kidnapping people and doing horrible things to them before selling their organs on the black market. No, Izuku, that's exactly what they did, but he doesn't need to know. Toga cough. I want to eat with him, Izuku said, getting up slowly from the bed. Dude, you don't have to if you don't dash. Kirishima began to bless his soul, but Kaminari shoved his face out the way. Great. Now strip. Kaminari said, immediately pantsing Izuku without a warning. Izuku let out a very, very unmanly, horrid scream. In moments Izuku was bathed, scrubbed, and dried in the most beautiful and biggest bathroom he has ever seen. Kaminari and Kirishima did well bathing him despite his screams of him being able to bathe himself. After that, he was dried and dressed by a woman with pink curly hair who completed his eyes, making him blush, and Kirishima had to constantly remind her of his personal space. Finally, he already felt like he had his soul cleansed and felt like a new person. It was the cleanest he has felt in years. Still, he was embarrassed for the men seeing him naked. Izuku was dressed in a button-up shirt topped with a nice tie Kirishima tied, as Izuku was a failure with trying to tie, and a nice dress jacket to go with his pants with nice dress shoes with comfy socks, unlike his other socks that were originally white but now an odd shade of blue for having to be washed in the washing machine with his other clothes. Kaminari and Kirishima were impressed as Mina looked smug as Izuku memorized how she did his outfit and hair. Thank you so much, Izuku said happily to them. Now we just head to the dining room to Baku, bro. Kirishima sighed a bit, slapping his hands together as Kaminari nodded. Yeah, let's get the show on the road for the two lovebirds. Kaminari jokes helped relieve some tension in Izuku's back. But still nervous as Izuku was still scared of meeting his supposed husband. The three men were heading to the door only to be stopped by the pink-haired girl Mina again. We are not done yet, guys, Mina said, blocking their way. She pulled out a small box as the two men, not Izuku who was confused, nodded and made a sound or recalled something important. Izuku watched as Mina handed him the box. One final touch. Just ask Bakugo to put it on you when you see him again. It will make him happy. Izuku did not know what she meant but shrugged it off. Kirishima called someone to let them. Izuku did not know who exactly. No, Izuku was ready. They then left the room into a beautiful, expensive-looking hallway with various decor Izuku was only seen in movies or those rich people's house tours. As they walked the halls, Izuku had cold feet. The guy was very handsome, and Izuku was plain-looking. Izuku was younger than him. Izuku was not even close to as rich as him. Izuku also had college to do. Izuku is the biggest nerd on campus. Not that was literally in his yearbook, which is not really an insult, more of a compliment, but still he stands his point, and he did not even know him. What if he was using Izuku? What if they were planning on using him? What if... Izuku's thoughts were interrupted by a subtle cough, making him realize Kirishima and Mina looked at him concerned as Kaminari, who was the one that coughed, was about to open a nicely engraved door. Sorry, I do that when I am nervous. Izuku murmured, flushing, looking guilty. Oh, it's fine, Mina said, patting him on the back. I would be nervous if I had to eat with Bakugo. Izuku thought that she would comfort him, but it only made him sweat more. Mina, you're scaring him, Kirishima said as he lightly pushed Mina aside. It's okay, Midoriya, don't listen to them and enjoy your dinner. Kirishima was guiding Mina and Kaminari away, leaving Izuku by the door alone, making him feel lost. Where are you guys going? Izuku asked as Kaminari waved to him, looking over Kirishima's arm which was wrapped around his neck. It's an okay dude. Kaken doesn't bite. Kaminari jokes, but Izuku only recalled the bite marks on his thighs, making him flush. Looking at the expensive engraved design door, behind that door was the man who not only took his virginity but was also his husband, who was rich and very handsome. Izuku remembered looking at the handsome man's sleeping face and how he was over the moon with that alone. But looks alone did not catch Izuku's heart. Sure, it made Izuku think about him for weeks, keeping him up at night wondering what color his eyes were. Izuku took a few deep breaths. He needed courage. He was not going to be upset over this if it did not work out, and he was not going to be the man's lapdog just. He was rich. They were married and Izuku needed to focus on college. A divorce is not only expensive but a long process. Izuku of course could ask his rich friend Todoroki for help if the relationship is bad, and he trusts Kirishima's words of this Kaken being a good person, but just cause the guy was a good person does not mean that they could work out perfectly. Relationships have arguments, and there was no such thing as a perfect relationship without a fight here or there. What matters is how both sides handle it and overcome the problem, and how the two have established communication and trust. Izuku wants that relationship, but with college, he figured he could wait till he graduated and became a surgeon. But now it was thrown unexpectedly. Taking a deep breath, he took one last moment to mentally prepare for meeting the handsome man before opening the door to rip off the band-aid and accept the heartbreak. Only to see the most beautiful dining room ever. It matched the color that matched the halls he walked through, red and gold. Izuku looked to his side to have his heart jump in his throat. The man was looking out the window at the cityscape, which made Izuku's world freeze. The man he had sleepless nights thinking about, the man he had left in that condo after their shared night which they were presumably married, the man who was his husband. Kaken? Izuku blurted without much thought, which he regretted as the man turned to him to reveal red dominating eyes that were not anywhere alluring, as it belonged to a face not as soft as it was when Izuku remembered it was a scowl of displeasure, and he looked 1000% more intimidating than Izuku saw when he's sleeping. Izuku was well dressed, yet the man just wore a button shirt with no tie and his pants were a bit baggy. Izuku just felt disappointment hit him, but he had to not judge a book by its cover. Maybe, "Oi nerd, hurry and sit down." The man said no more, like yelled as he gestured lazily to a chair next to him and sat in a chair on the end of the table. Izuku listened and sat in the seat as he felt a bit angry at himself for the scenarios that he thought would have played out. Yeah, Izuku thought he would spoil him or give him a gentle smile, sue him. A man can dream, okay? But it kind of hurt knowing the rich man did not put as much effort as Mina put in for Izuku. Hell, the food was nice and well presented, better than him. Izuku was doubting the relationship very much, so he ate it. The food was delicious and Izuku was no longer nervous since the man next to him ate somewhat aggressively with the same scowl, not glancing at Izuku. Izuku did the same. Once Izuku was full, he put the napkin neatly down on his lap, ready to talk to the man. But right when he turned his head, the man stood up and began walking out, making Izuku's jaw drop. Izuku was ready to snap at this man. Screw it, he was disrespecting Izuku. Respect is not given, it was earned. Yes, but this was just flat out rude. Izuku frowned, ready to ask to leave so he could eat Todoroki to help him get divorce papers. But the man then stopped at the door entrance. Izuku stood up begrudgingly, feeling as though the man wanted to talk to him somewhere else. The box no doubt was a ring. Izuku 100% was ready to throw it at the man's face. Izuku followed the man through the extravagant walls. This helped him calm down a bit, yet was stupid to think the guy would have fallen head over heels in just one night. Izuku should feel happy though, as there would no longer be a distraction. He needed to focus on his school and then on some drunken mistake he made that led to him marrying the stranger who was coincidentally good-looking. They had nothing in common, and the age gap was a clear sign that the two were never meant to be. Izuku followed the older, bulkier man through the halls, which were now dark, making Izuku concerned and a bit scared, so he got a bit closer to the man, not because he was scared of the dark, but what could be in it. This was not someplace he knew at all. The man then stopped and Izuku looked over to see he was pushing buttons on a keypad. "Where are you taking me?" he asked, taking a step away from the man with furrowed brows. "Relax," the man said in a husky voice, making Izuku feel himself heat up. The voice was deep and demanding, making Izuku feel his heart flip. But he was upset that the guy was being rude to say that since he was kidnapped, dragged here, and bathed by strangers. This guy was lucky Izuku was getting free food and wanted to see him. If Izuku had known he was in, but he would have stayed in the room and planned an escape from here. Suddenly the wall separated like an elevator, making Izuku jump a bit. It was a bit smaller than an average elevator, but Izuku believes that its purpose was not for more than one person. And with its golden metallic walls and black gold marble floor. Of course, Kaken walked in all normally. He turned around to push the button to then sort of scowl at Izuku, who stood there unsure of what was happening. "Please get inside here already, I don't bite," he huffed, which made Izuku flush. Walking into the elevator to slip behind Kaken, he was holding back a snarky remark about To recall their night in which Izuku could still feel the bite marks in between his thighs, making him turn red as he forced those thoughts out of his head by looking at the wall. He just wanted to go back to his dorms. Being stuck in an elevator filled with silence is too awkward for Izuku. Usually, an elevator with music is more soothing. So he built up some courage to try and start a conversation. "Your room," Kaken spoke as Izuku began to open his mouth. "Pardon?" Izuku could not help but be confused. Until Kaken spoke again. "Your room, was it to your liking?" Kaken repeated more clearly this time. "Oh, yes, the bed was comfy and Kirishima and Kaminari were nice. Aside from them taking me from my dorm," Izuku muttered the last part, but Kaken still heard it as he had a quick reply. "You will be living here now, so forget about that shithole," he said casually as the elevator dinged at the exact moment Izuku's jaw dropped. "Living here?" Izuku squeaked as Kaken merely walked out the elevator into what looked to be the top of the building, filled with flowers and trees, vines beautifully looping surrounding the clear, wide path made of bricks with not a single strand of grass poking up. In the center of it all was a nice garden table and comfy chairs as the night sky poked through the glass dome they were inside of. Izuku briskly followed the older man in a state of panic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kaken, but what do you mean by that? I go to Yui University dash." "No need," Kaken answered as he sat in one of the chairs. "Besides, I make more than enough money for us." Izuku did not sit down, however. "Us? What does that have to do with my education?" "We are married, so obviously you live with me," Kaken said, crossing his arms and glaring Izuku down. "I just learned we were married today, Kaken," Izuku said, plopping across him on the chair. "I still want to finish my education to be a surgeon. It's been my dream for a very long time. And I hardly see us as a couple." Izuku slapped a hand on his mouth as Kaken seemed to be glaring at Izuku. He saw the blonde, spiky-haired man huff as he crossed his arms. "So you're just going to run off and forget what happened?" The man growled while Izuku shook his head. "And no, I never. I am just saying I wish to finish my schooling and be able to do my lifelong dream," Izuku said, sweating profusely as the ash-blonde spiky man looked down at him. If Izuku was not scared, he would have been turned on by this, but right now he thought he was going to die. Kaken huffed before speaking. "Since you want to do your schooling so bad you can continue your learning." Izuku mentally high-fived the gods as he almost shed tears of joy, free from this crazed beast of a man. "Which I will have Siro stay by your side while I can have Kirishima drive you." "Wait, what?" Izuku said as he felt as though God backhanded him in the face. "Why do they need to do any of those things?" "Well, for starters, my wife is not going to walk to his classes, and second, I do not want to risk you getting in any sort of trouble at school," Kaken said, crossing his arms while Izuku gaped and flushed at being called wife. "Hold on. I can return to the dorm dash," Izuku began but was quickly cut off. "Not." Kaken growled. "You are not living in that sheet-hole." "It is not." Izuku tried to defend. "You believe it's not only proof that you should not stay there." Kaken started making Izuku frown. Izuku stood up to tell this man he was not going on with this, but a ringtone interrupted and the man took it and listened, then put it away before he stood up. "We can talk about this another time, for right now it is late and you need your rest," Kaken said as he rose and headed to the elevator, upsetting Izuku more. Izuku begrudgingly followed and stayed silent, though, as he did not want to anger this man with so much power. It was frustrating, much like when he was younger with his overbearing mother, who became overly bearing when his father had to work overseas to earn their income. It was always her helicopter, and sure, things changed when the two talked, but this man was not like his mom. He did not know him. He was for stars still confused about the situation and what the man sees him as. 1. He was not going to be this guy's stress relief cause 1 EW. 2. This man was an a-hole who was arrogant and rude. And 3. The older guy had practically planned on him being a housewife. Hell, no, Izuku was not someone who would lay down. He was always up and moving. If he wasn't, it made him bored out of his mind. Izuku would 100% give this man a piece of his mind, but when the man answered his phone, Izuku noticed he looked angered at the interruption, and Izuku was not ready to die so young. He would have said he would not want to die a virgin, but The walk to Izuku's room was silent and awkwardly silent as a strong tension was there making Izuku feel that the man would snap at any moment. Once at a familiar door where Izuku was dressed so nicely by Kirishima and the others, he had left it believing that there was a slight chance that this would be something from a fairy tale. Well, he was just happy he was brought back to reality as he walked in the room, closing the door silently to go to his new bed to angrily cry. Meanwhile, the man he had just misjudged stomped to an unexpected meeting, furious at the interruption of his date. Kirishima looked at the scene after sending the text to Mina, who was helping in putting it together. It was no secret the Bakugas had enemies. Those either for their public face or private affairs from Bakuga's second life. Many people who even attempted to reveal it were dealt with right off the bat. Still, people would try other ways to get to the Bakugas, such as trying to kill their loved ones. This is hard when the family is mainly 3 people and are very untouchable even to the closest of workers or bodyguards. So they tried different ways, such as trying to kill workers who work for them as a tactic. However, that would be their biggest mistake, as the one man they killed was a dear friend of the family, leading to the people responsible to be killed off the face of the earth, including those who were related to them in any way. And everyone else working for the Bakugo family is required to train their guts out to not just protect the Bakugo family members but themselves. But this tactic used was odd, to say the least. If they were trying to put some sort of sign, it left Kirishima and the others at a complete loss. Here in the back of one of the Bakugo buildings lay a beheaded sheep, which was placed in the trash can, badly dyed green, with its decapitated head on a stick that was stabbed in place of one of the garbage bags. Maybe these guys are fans of Lord of the Flies? Kaminari said, confused, tilting his head at the display. Kirishima sighed and turned to his boss, who was glaring at the decaying corpse of the sheep with pure rage. Kirishima knew it was a threat, perhaps for Midoriya, but for what? He just got here a few hours ago. Sure, a lot of prepositions for the boss's little wife were made, but it was all very, very discreet. Seems as though someone thinks they can threaten my wife, the boss said in an angered, calm tone with a threatening expression. With a simple wave of his hand, a person in a suit beside him nodded and walked over to pull out the decaying body of the sheep to inspect it. Kaminari pulled out a napkin as the sloshing sound of flesh played louder than the background lively night city to cover the smell. I should not have eaten lamb chops for dinner. He sighed. Not disturbed but more disgusted, as though the dog shat on his shoe. The man inspecting the sheep's corpse stopped and looked up at the boss. The body is fresh air, and from how the sheep's fur was well maintained and well fed. However, there seemed to be some faded bite marks like a wolf or dog's, as though it was played with before being decapitated after death. Bakugo tilted his head in thought as his eyes focused on the sheep. Crossing his arms and removing them from his pockets, he smirked. There's one fucking bastard who owns a lot of dogs with his farm of pets out of anyone in the city near our territory, one being sheep. A dark smirk played on his lips. I'll have you handle this for me. It would not be much trouble, will it? Bakugo asked, dropping his smirk in a dark calm expression to Mina, Kamianri, and Jiro, who all had a sort of excitement in their eyes as they bowed a bit to their boss in loyalty, who nodded, dropping his arms to his side to lazily wave his hand. The man inspecting the body nodded and went to get the decaying sheep's body to give it a proper burial. As Bakugo walked back to the building with 3 security guards, including Kirishima, by his side, as his mind pondered. Now, with that problem to be resolved soon, he had to deal with his little wife. Why was it so hard to accept they were married? He loved him and he loved him, so why was it so hard to just go with it? No need to ponder about it? In the elevator, only he and Kirishima stood as the others left, as he kept pondering. His wife can't be angered by their marriage? They liked each other and had a lot in common, so what could make him see it from Bakugo's perspective? Hey, shitty hair, Bakugo said as Kirishima nodded. Yes, sir. How do I let my wife know I love him? Bakugo asked Kirishima to look at his jaw dropped before quickly fixing it. Well, sir, for starters, you need to tell him you love him. Bakugo frowned. He already knows that. I married him and had issue with him. Kirishima flushed from the bold statement his boss had said. 'Cause Kirishima could live his whole life not having to hear about his SEC life. Well, you two were drunk when it all happened, sir. Kareem's explained. Are you saying I was acting irrationally just cause I was drunk? Bakugo said in a dark tone. No, sir, it's just your wife finds it all hard to believe. He does not remember everything as you do. Kirishima explained calmly because he did not want a screaming match with this man when he could be at his home working out and listening to his favorite song. Bakugo thought for a moment as the elevator opened to the same floor Bakugo's wife slept. That is a problem. Bakugo murmured as he took off his coat and threw it on the couch, and Kirishima went to the small bar table near the living room to make himself a protein shake. I just need to take him on dates and talk to him, he said bluntly. Kirishima looked at the back of his boss's head as though it was pathetic. His boss seriously had no clue about romance. He felt bad for Midoriya. He's going to have to take control and help out his poor boss. Kirishima was just as bad though. He still wanted to go out with Mina but was intimidated by her amazing bright and bubbly personality. What time does the nerd get out of class? Bakugo asked, snapping Kirishima's attention. Tomorrow is Saturday, so he is getting out at 2 p.m., sir. Then he has his part-time job from 3 p.m. to 8 or 10 p.m. Kirishima started drinking his drink. Izuku had school on the weekend for one of his extra classes, but it could be cancelled. Bakugo sneered and laid back on the sofa. Call his job and pay them to let him go. He does not need to work there anymore. And find a way to make the class end early. Bakugo said, swinging a hand, which Kirishima nodded. And also, call that one restaurant and tailor. Because my wife needs a good outfit for our date. Kirishima tilted his head. You're letting him still go to college, sir? They want to be a surgeon. Who am I to tell them no? Besides, that is far better than my wife dealing with shitty customers. Bakugo grunted. Actually, when do his classes start? Noon. Kirishima said. Bakugo furrowed. Should I take him out for breakfast? Bakugo asked, leaning forward in thinking yet intimidating pose. You can try? He wakes up at 11 though, Kirishima said as Bakugo suddenly glared at him. He could not be mad at him since he hired him to go watch his daily routine to make sure no one else tried anything with his love in case someone caught wind. Kirishima has already been working on perfecting his speaking since he used to be mute. So this whole situation made him speak more than he had ever done, so this not only changed his boss but him as well. Midoriya certainly was one of the reasons things have been crazier around the building. Izuku looked down at the food before him in awe. It was bigger than he usually was used to, which was either fast food, a vending machine snack, or just flat out nothing. And even with his mother and mostly absent father, it was nothing as big as just some eggs mixed with tortillas, or eggs mixed with potatoes, or a trip to Denny's for pancakes. But this breakfast was bigger and something he only saw on cable TV. A side bowl of berries with 3 layered waffles topped with sugar powder, fruit, and lots of whipped cream and setup. A plate with fluffy scrambled eggs with sausages, and finally a chocolate muffin. And a cup of freshly squeezed orange juice, sir, Kirishima said, plopping it down on the bed tray. Izuku was not gonna even finish it. It was too much. He did not want to waste it, and he also did not want to be sick. Can you eat with me? I can't finish this all, Izuku said, offering the red-haired man his plate of eggs and sausages. But he shook his head. Afraid not, sir. I am on a strict diet, plus the boss worked hard to make this for you before tidying up some stuff for after your classes today. Kirishima explained nonchalantly as Izuku frowned at eating his waffles. Sure, it could be poisoned, but it's been so long since he had a waffle. After my classes I have work? Izuku sighed as he ate a piece of fruit that was nice and sweet. Well, not anymore, Kirishima said, scratching the back of his head with a guilty yet not so guilty look on his face, making Izuku grow. What? How will I make money? Izuku asked, almost choking on his food. How is he going to buy clothes? Or better yet, a house when he leaves this hellhole, when the insane man comes to his senses? Or when he wants All Might merch? He never could afford them before, and he knows the man has replaced them with more than before in his room, but still he wanted to get it himself. Bakubro will. He is your husband after all, Kirishima says happily as Izuku flies. Has everyone lost their mind? Bakugo hates his presence and wants control over Izuku. Izuku sulked. It was his fault for getting his hopes up. So, what are his plans after I finish my classes? Izuku asked as he bit into the waffle using the fork to cut into it instead of the butter knife, making Kirishima hold back a laugh. It had been a while since he had seen someone do that since he had joined the Bakugo. Well, he says it's a surprise. Since he wants to get to know you again after the whole, Kirishima said as Izuku nodded. So he wanted to talk more with Izuku? That's fair, or maybe set up some sort of deal. Izuku had a chill at the thought of the older man using his organs on the black market. I guess it's okay if he does not try to sell my organs, Izuku said without much thought, making Kirishima laugh. No, he won't, you can relax. I think the boss would sell our organs than have a hair on your head touched, Kirishima said, sighing as Izuku breathed a sigh of relief but still felt confused by the comment. That's good. But where is Kaminari? Izuku asked, tilting his head. The two seemed close. Handling some business, Kirishima said as he clapped his hands. Well, time for you to get ready for your class. You need to be on time. Izuku sighed, feeling full and content. But he felt sleepy again from being fed so much food, so he let himself get dressed by maids as he hummed in contentment after having a warm bath. It was like he was floating. He just could not help but smile in contentment. Once he was ready with not just a new backpack and books, but with a new cell phone. And it was the latest model. It had an all-night phone case and his backpack was nice yellow leather. Izuku felt guilty, but he should have used this opportunity, right? 'Cause the guy was the one causing him trouble and insisting on taking care of him, so it was all right? Izuku walked to the living room, which he was still in awe. He sat on the edge of the couch, scared to touch anything even though he had showered. He was scared he would break the couch just by sitting on it. Nervously, he touched his school bag that held the wedding ring in the box. He did not give it to Bakugo to put it back on him, and he nervously worried about what could happen after he finished his classes. What was he going to talk about with the man? They barely said anything when they were together. Izuku was more depressed seeing the man who was too much for him in many ways than one. Kirishima soon came back with Shiro, who was dressed in a baggy shirt and saggy pants with a backward hat of his university and a satchel. Yusuke tilted his head confused. Izuku wore clothes that were not worn out and were not so tight, but Shiro was dressed like a stoner. So you ready for school? Shiro said with a smug grin as Kirishima smiled with thumbs up. How old are you guys? Izuku could not help but ask. I'm 29, Kirishima said with a grin as Shiro shrugged. 32. What? No way, you guys look so young. Izuku said, dropping his jaw. Same with Bakugo too. What was their skin routine? Kirishima smiled bigger than Shiro. So with that, we must head to school now, Shiro said excitedly. Izuku nodded with defeat and just prayed the day went all right. Izuku said nothing more as they went to the car to be dropped off. Izuku tried to convince them to take him in a normal car, but they would not listen and drove him to school. They were dropped off at the university where some passerbyers looked at the car in awe, making Izuku flush and walk briskly to class with Shiro at his tail. Midoriya. Izuku whimpered at the sound of his friend's voice and he quickly turned to Shiro. My friends don't know about this, Izuku whimpered. Shiro patted him on the back. It's cool. It's cool. Just act like I am a relative, Shiro said casually while Izuku sighed as he turned to see Todoroki walking up to him at a slow pace. He looked back at Shiro and sighed. Oki, you are my cousin from my dad's side. You are just here to take a look around before joining for next semester. Shiro smiled and put a thumbs up, making Izuku sign in worry. Midoriya, I tried to give you back your book, but your room was cleaned out. I was worried, Todoroki said in a calm tone. But Izuku knew he was worried. Sorry for not telling you, Todoroki. It was very sudden for me as well, Izuku said while Shiro scratched the back of his head with a nervous laugh. My cousin came into town and And I am Shiro Hinata, may I know your name? Shiro said in a very obvious suggestive flirtatious tone, stepping in front of puzzled Izuku. Todoroki merely tilted his head but nodded. Oh, nice to meet you. I am Todoroki Shoto, he said plainly. Shiro was 31 years old. Izuku's jaw dropped at how the two started talking with a one-sided flirty man and the other nodding and listening to Shiro. Izuku huffed tiredly as they headed to class as he felt like a third wheel as the two talked ahead of him. Bakugo looked down at his phone and grinned as he sat in the back of the limo, his thumb on his free hand rubbed against the ring on his finger. He decided he needed to tell the old hag the news of his marriage. He did not want to do so before, but right now he needed her in on it, even though he knows how she will react. Stopping at the restaurant, he groaned and was guided in with a few men to go to his room to see his old hag and old man sitting as she happily fed her husband. The old hag wore a drape-over-the-shoulder red coat as she wore an office formal skirt and a button-up shirt with rolled-up sleeves and red heels. His father wore a simple tux with a red bow like his wife. Bakugo snarled at the scene and begrudgingly sat across them. With the restaurant having private rooms for higher-class people, there were no worries of interruptions. They could talk about this at home, but a public place can help avoid the old hag from blowing up more. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Old hag said smugly as his dad nodded with a gentle smile to his son as he began eating on his own. You look well, Kastuki, his father said happily. I had a few things to handle, Bakugo grunted, taking off his coat but leaving the gloves on to hide his ring. The old hag sighed a bit annoyed, crossing her arms. I see you sent some men off to handle some threat that was made at us. She sighed as Bakugo nodded as he pushed the order button for some lamb chops due to the sudden craving. But may I ask why the threat was made up of a badly dyed sheep that was beheaded? Bakugo sighed at the memory, now regretting his order. Bakugo sighed and leaned back and crossed his legs like his mother, who looked to be studying him, as his father sighed as if to prepare for a battle. Well, that is part of why I called you here, Bakugo grunted, leaning forward as immediately a worker brought his food and left with him. Sit properly, his mother yelled as he growled back at her. Stop that. Don't tell us. Why did you call us here? You didn't try taking over another territory, did you? No. And I got the other one successfully, didn't I? Bakugo hissed, clenching the table. Tiesuke. So what if you did? You were reckless. But with a gentle hand from his father, instantly made him pause and sigh, letting Bakugo not hear her loud yelling. You're getting old. One thing you can do is find a wife, not causing me any more heart attacks. His mother huffed as Bakugo merely poured himself wine. You can stop saying that now, Bakugo said as both of his parents raised a brow. Why? She asked, leaning in and looking at her son as he sent her a look that made her gasp. Kastuki Badu, you better not have forced some poor girl to marry you. She yelled, pointing a finger at him. I did not. And it's not a girl. Bakugo yelled back. I married him and we are a happily married couple, Bakugo seethed. Poor man. She shook her head as Bakugo growled. Shut up. The three ate in somewhat peace before Bakugo got finished and ready to leave. Tiesuke. See you later, old hag. Old man. Hey. His mother yelled before the door shut as she sat back, angrily tapping her finger. That brat. Come on, sweetie, aren't you more excited to know you have a son-in-law? Her husband said with a soft smile. And he did not invite us to hell. He didn't even tell us shit about him, that brat. She huffed. Before humming as she began thinking as her husband pulled out his wallet to pay. College seems fun, man. I wish I could have gone. Shiro sighed happily as he walked beside Izuku. Class finished and it was pretty fun, and Izuku was just happy Shiro was not doing anything to bring attention. Aside from getting Todoroki Shudo Aka the no emotion, having a kid to laugh, making many people support Shiro and Todoroki's friendship. Well, Izuku knows Shiro wants more than friendship with his friend, and he worries for Todoroki. You didn't? Izuku asked, tilting his head as they walked to the entrance of the college campus to meet up for Kirishima, who will be picking them up. Nah, I had no money and slacked off. Shiro sighed. Should have listened to my dad when he said to stay in school. Izuku nodded in agreement. He related that with his poor background, his father always reminded Izuku to focus on school. His mother and father had no degree due to the cost of college, and with the neighborhood they lived in, his parents were just as overprotective of him, as well as how they chose to use money. Money was saved for the house or food. And if they got sick or injured, his parents kept working. Their stress made them put a lot of pressure on Izuku to do well in school. No, they did not yell or make him stay at the table while one of them yells a problem at him. It was how tired they looked that pushed him. It motivated him to stay up at night studying, push himself into sports, and dig in trash cans at the back of a sports store to get equipment, and it motivated him to work part-time at a sketchy job lifting boxes to earn some money and sneak it in his mom's purse. It was hard with his parents making sure he stayed at school, at home, and at grandma's house. No sleepovers and no camping. Izuku knew the neighborhood was bad, but how his parents acted it made Izuku question their childhood. Yes, their life was better when he got in high school when Todoroki helped his dad get a better job and move to a safer neighborhood, but their habits never could be rubbed off. They would still use hand-me-downs and coupons, but more importantly Izuku's desire to excel in school and his parents wanting to protect him. So, what exactly do you do? Izuku asked to make conversation. I know Bakugo designs, but I still do not know much. Well, I am his bodyguard, Shiro said bluntly. But the boss's identity is secretive and private since his parents want him to stay clear from the public eye. Izuku could see why the Bakugo Beauty Company was well known, importantly, known for their cosmetics and clothes. Sold worldwide along with donating to charity weekly. They made outfits and jewelry influencers and celebrated the show off at events. Izuku never really heard of them cause he never really watched TV much. So, you and Kaken knew each other for a pretty long time? Izuku asked while fumbling his fingers. So if Shiro is close to him, then that surely means he knew what was going on with Kaken. Why on earth would he want to stay married to Izuku if he hated him? And why put money on Izuku? Yeah, that is what married couples do for each other, but they were no regular married couple. And Izuku never had any intention of getting married till he accomplished being a surgeon. Shiro raised a brow but nodded. I guess so, like 20 or 15 years? We are best bros as Kirishima would call it. Izuku nodded. Well, then can you be able to tell me? Well, I don't know, but why exactly did Kaken marry me? I do not know honestly. Shiro shrugged, making Izuku gape at the older man. He said it so bluntly and casually. This was marriage. Years of commitment and money into a relationship. Was this guy not worried about his friend marrying some stranger? But if Bakugo wants it, I do not see the problem. They do. Izuku thought bitterly. Izuku was frustrated. How was he supposed to be fine with marrying a man he had no idea about and had no idea if he even felt the same? If the guy has no intention of putting within Izuku's boundaries or his feelings, then why should he put effort into this relationship? Or more like, why was the guy being so serious about them being married? People usually go on dates before they get married. Izuku could not help but murmur, but Shiro heard it. Shiro knows Bakugo has a hard time with words, and when he puts his mind on something he sees it. He also never acts on something he has no feelings for. If he had felt nothing for his little wife, as everyone nicknames Midoriya, then he would have returned the ring and cancelled the papers of their marriage. One thing is that he clearly did not remember the boss, so there was no need to threaten him. But it was clear the relationship was getting rocky. Judging from what he knows from both of these men, it was the two have different ways of communicating. Bakugo was a man of action and Midoriya was a man of words. Bakugo already believes the two love each other, so he does not believe the two need to show off their relationship with public affections, flirty comments, or cheesy things. While Midoriya wants there to be words to clear up the confusion in his head, since he is a young man and not comfortable with this man who hired his bodyguards to kidnap him and bring him to his house. Well, that is Bakugo's behavior. Shiro agreed before thinking. It was true, for their relationship to work, all that needs to happen is communication and affection. Bakugo just needs to be more clear about his emotions, and Izuku needs something to help clear his confusion to return said feelings. So, dating, yes, but they should probably work on Izuku's parents and background. They need to find a way to have Bakugo be introduced before breaking the news of their marriage, which will be tough cause if he married someone his mother surely would have beat his, but for not inviting her, yeah, they will need to brainstorm. I don't see dash. Suddenly a cold chill went down his spine when they made it to the entrance, making him have Izuku behind him as he glared at where he felt the eyes of the possible intruder. Izuku tilted his head confused at the man as he adjusted his backpack at the gate, nervously glancing around to see just normal college students and a few cars. Shiro, we need to go. That was all Shiro said before he began pulling Izuku, who looked around confused. What was happening? Why was he acting so strange? But his thoughts were interrupted when Shiro stopped having Izuku hit his back. Izuku winced, releasing a pained muffled growth as he rubbed his nose. Shiro was slightly taller than Izuku, but he was not very muscular. He was a bit slender, so his back felt like bricks with his spin hitting Izuku in the nose, making Izuku tear. Shiro, Izuku began before he played with a gulp as he looked over Shiro's shoulder to see a big-built hairy man with glasses in a suit like Kirishima looking down at them, and Izuku was sure he saw, and under those shades it was a look of death. Bakugo was pondering about his plans with his little wife for their getaway weekend. Kirishima was driving, and with traffic, they were a bit late, but Shiro was his trusted worker. So Izuku was in good hands. Bakugo had made plans of them going on a simple trip for their romantic getaway, till they have to return on Tuesday for Izuku's classes and Bakugo for his business, which will be them at a muraka. He set up a room, and their private plane was scheduled to leave in a few hours to Conrad Maldives' Rangali Island, where it will be just the two of them. Actually, should he just set it for a week? He saw pictures of what Shiro took of his wife when Deku went studying outside of campus, and he looked worn out. That fucker needed more than just a couple of days. As a husband should, he should help his wife relax and spend time with him. Luckily, he knew the guy running the place, and he can sort some things out to extend their stay. And he had packed a lot of spare clothes that would look cute on the nerd besides his usual style. Come one dude, no horny thoughts in my car. Kirishima groaned, making Bakugo frown deeply. Shut up and drive, Bakugo growled as he crossed his muscular arms and legs to look out the very window. Only to see Shiro, alone, making his heart drop and his blood run cold. And it began to boil when Shiro had no injuries, indicating he had put up a fight. Does this mean this fucker let the nerd wander off on his own, risking him getting hurt? Angrily, when the car came to a stop, he opened the door to walk up to the black-haired man, deathly calm before giving him a backhand slap. Shiro took it with no complaints as Bakugo glared down at him with anger. No one was looking, and those who did look away with one swift glare from Kirishima. Did you not pledge your loyalty to your life? To give for my family? Bakugo said in a calm tone that held so much anger in his voice. Kirishima stood behind him. Anytime Bakugo was angry, it was him who would calm him down or Shiro, but this time he knew Shiro f'd up. And Bakugo was upset. Bakugo was not going to kill Shiro, if Midoriya was not hurt in any way, that is. Shiro with a swollen cheek nodded. Yes, sir. I follow orders from your family and your family alone. No matter the cost. Why is the nerd not here as I told you? Bakugo growled as Shiro did not flinch but looked down a bit ashamed. Shiro took a moment to prepare before he spoke, knowing it would lead to utter madness with yelling, and a lot of, well, yelling, maybe even shooting. Because your mother was the one to take Midoriya. Izuku looked at what was to be an aquarium, which was odd since weren't aquariums closed. But he was tipsy, so logic was out the window as his eyes were glued to the fish in awe. He always loved fish. Sure, it had something to do with his parents only affording to get him a goldfish, but the way fish were able to freely move around in the water fascinated the boy so much he would stay up at night merely looking at his fish bowl in awe. I love fish, Izuku said with a small laugh as he swayed a bit. An arm wrapped around his waist to pull him in a back hug with Izuku's back in someone's chest, making him feel what he had not felt in a long time. A deep hum from the man's hand on top of him made Izuku smile, softly nuzzling deeper in the man's chest with a flush. They both smelled of alcohol and were barely able to stand, but the two were in their own world. In a warm embrace with their eyes glued on the huge blue fish tank as beautiful big fish swam in a dance. Hey, Deku. The deep voice from the man chimed in after a few heartbeats as Izuku hummed for him to continue. I enjoyed our shitty time together, and the older male paused for a while, but Izuku waited patiently for him to continue. When the man finally found his words, he took a big deep breath, making Izuku feel his firm pecs expand then deflate like a pillow. I want to marry you. The younger man hummed a bit as he shuffled a bit to turn around with the older man's strong arms to keep him from going too far from him and keeping him from falling on the marble floor, for Izuku to reach his hands on the older man's strong jaw to kiss his lips. Yeah, me too. The tension in the room was so strong that Izuku could practically cut it with a knife. He was sitting in a private room in an expensive restaurant across from a woman who very much looked like Kaken but as a woman. She was curvy and had beautiful skin. Izuku did not know who she was, but Izuku was debating internally if she was Kaken's sister or cousin since she looked pretty young. But he felt like he saw her somewhere. Well, all he knew was 1 minute he was with Siro before being pulled in a limo and then brought here. He should have been fighting, at least he thought he was. It was all too fast to recall. God, he wished people in this family would stop with the whole kidnapping thing. Is this a thing rich people do? Some maids walked in to place some cakes in front of Izuku and the women with cute designs with a stand with various sweet treats like small fruit tarts and cakes, cupcakes, and macarons. The lady seemed to notice his awe at the food and nervousness to eat without permission, so with a humorous smile she nodded to him. You can eat as much as you want. Izuku hesitantly got a fork and began to slowly take a bite of the fruit cake before him, and once the taste touched his tongue he melted in the taste. It had been so long since he had something so sweet and tasty. Not to mention the texture was fluffy and moist. It was better than the cake his mother made from those boxes from the gas station down the road, or the cake his dad bought for his 16th birthday when they finally could move to a neighborhood that was safe and had a yard. His father and mother were still protective, but at least the two could sleep without having to move a chair on the front door to keep drugged creeps from trying to break in, or having to walk at night with a heavy blunt object to protect themselves from being mugged, or keeping Izuku away from a certain park from gangs that would hang out there looking for trouble. So you are married to Bakugo? The woman asked in a sweet voice, making Izuku almost choke. Clearing his throat, he gulped down the bite of cake he was chewing on before, almost choking on it. Why, yes. She clapped her hands happily. Oh, my lords. About time he settled down. And with someone so cute too. She chuckled, leaning closer to put a few fingers in his curls, making him flush from the touch and her cleavage coming out of her button shirt. I was so surprised when that beat finally told me about you. She huffed, sitting back in her chair, arms crossed. Izuku just knew right off she was referring to Bakugo. Izuku cleared his throat. Well, it was very surprising for me as well, Izuku said as the lady sighed, placing a hand on her cheek. That son of mine, he just loves to do whatever he wants. Izuku's jaw dropped. This was Kaken's mother? She looked so young. And as old as Bakugo. Wait, if Bakugo was 30, she's got at least be 50? Not impossible, she looked younger. Sure, she had wrinkles but only visible under her eye, nothing else. You're Kaken's mother? Izuku could not help but ask. He had to confirm this information. The lady laughed at Izuku's dismay. Yes, sorry for not introducing myself. I am Mitsuki Bakugo. I am Izuku Midoriya. Izuku said, immediately waving his arms. I just thought you were Kaken's sister. You look so young. This earned a slight blush on the woman's face as she hummed. That is very flattering to hear. She sighed. Izuku smiled and relaxed a bit now. But not too relaxed since he was kidnapped. But not fearful since there was no sign of her trying to kill him, yet. So, I know you are a college student. What are you studying? She asked, leaning in with her chin on her crossed fingers as her elbows rested on the table while her coat still laid on her shoulders. I am working on being a surgeon. Next year I will start my actual classes and training. I am planning on interning for Dr. Yagi. Izuku explained happily by saying the name brought to light the women's eyes. As in Yagi Tashinori? She asked, tilting her head, to which Izuku nodded. Yes. He was a doctor in my old childhood neighborhood who helped my mother and father despite them not being able to afford to pay him. After he moved to make his clinic, I always looked up to him and wanted to save people with a smile as he did and help my parents live a comfortable life. Izuku said, looking down at his cake with a soft smile as Mitsuki looked at him for a moment before smiling with a knowing look in her eyes. He is like that, good man he is. Mitsuki sighed. I helped fund his clinic, and after pulling some strings he finally found a good place to get it. He helped me through a lot of dark times. You meet Mr. Tashinori? Izuku gasped, which earned a chuckle from the older women. In my line of work I needed his help more times than I can count, she sighed. Izuku wanted to know what she meant by that but simply shrugged it off. I should go see that loser later with my husband to visit him. Anyways, your parents were probably more surprised about this marriage than I was. Izuku straightened his back at that. His parents? Of course, they would not be surprised, it would practically kill them. And he hasn't texted them in a while. He should. Old hag. The door behind Izuku slammed open, making him jump and turn to see a scowl on Kaken's face that was deep and may even be deadly. Kaken glanced at Izuku with his angry red eyes, making him flinch before he glared at the older woman who smiled smugly as she sipped her tea. Seeming to lose his fire, he pointed at his mother. Don't pull that sheet ever again or I'll cut off your hands, old beach. He growled before turning to Izuku, softening his expression. Let's go, Deku, we have a plane to catch. A plane? Izuku asked, picking up his backpack before turning to Bakuga's mother, bowing a bit. Thank you for the food, it was good and Izuku was going to ask if they could talk another time, but Kaken pulled Izuku by the hand out of the private room as the older women merrily sighed. Come on, Deku. Kaken. Hold on. Quite a possessive man, isn't he? She sighed as she sipped her tea alone in the brevet room with almost all the cake eaten by the younger man. He got it from my side of the family though. Shiro, you need to be more careful when you're running. Izuku said as he panically put a bag of ice on his cheek from a freezer containing alcohol in the back of the limo. Izuku still had questions for Kaken, but seeing Shiro's bruised cheek needed attention. Izuku asked him what happened. He said he was hit by a stupid pole. It was purple and a bit yellowish. It looked very painful, yet the guy still waved and smiled at him when he got in the limo. Even now he was still smiling for some odd reason despite it looking very painful. Izuku felt like Kaken was angry and he did not know why. Izuku should be the one upset. He came into his life controlling if he should work, go to school, and go on vacation. Kaken, what did you mean about missing our flight? Izuku asked, frowning at his husband, if he could even say that. Exactly what it means, we are going on vacation. Bakugo merely huffed, reading a newspaper, not looking at Izuku who was sitting next to him as Shiro sat by the window that was tinted dark. Vacation? I have classes. Izuku said, reasonably upset. Only a few days, besides we need this trip, Kaken said, turning a page in the newspaper with a leather glove. We need it, Izuku said with a frown. Kirishima in the front of the limo chose this moment to slowly close the window to block the sound of what sounded to be an argument beginning to boil. Shiro wished he had sat up front. Kaken, I need to study, complete my homework, and review my notes. I can't afford a vacation when I need to be passing college, especially right now when finals are around the corner. There will always be time for studying when we are on vacation. You have your books and I already packed all the necessary things you will need. Kaken said with no reaction to Izuku's dilemma. Kaken, the point is you did this without talking about it with me. Izuku said, rubbing his eyes. I need time to mentally prepare, and, you can't just do this on a whim. Well, that would ruin the point of a surprise, Kaken said, closing his newspaper and finally looking at Izuku. Well, I do not like surprises, Izuku said tiredly. You enjoyed our surprise wedding, Kaken says, making Izuku want to pull hairs out of his head. He wanted to yell that he was drunk when the car pulled up at the airport. Izuku looked out the window over Shiro's head in curiosity. Where are we going? Izuku asked, turning to Bakugo who shrugged nonchalantly. Just a simple trip, Bakugo said, closing and folding his newspaper. Clothes needed were bought and packed for you already. Izuku had shivers at that. Wouldn't have any ill intent, right? No, surely with Shiro and Kirishima by their side he would plain face, get the languages with shitty hair to help load on the plane as an apology, Kaken said as the car pulled up by what looked to be a huge plane. Izuku gazed at the plane. Kaken opened the limo door and waited until Izuku realized it was open for him. Izuku begrudgingly got out, clenching his backpack in his chest and trying to calm his racing, confused heart, allowing Bakugo to close the door. Sir? Kirishima said as Kaken growled and went to the red-haired spiky man. What shitty hair can't get a language out of a car? Izuku turned to pull his phone out to send a quick text to his friends. Just a small lie about being out of touch with them. Yeah, he could call the cops, but a free vacation somewhere sounded fun, right? Besides, as long as Kaken did not pull any funny moves, it was all green flags. Kirishima and Shiro seemed nice, and they cut the awkward mood between him and Kaken. He pressed send and turned his phone on airplane mode before putting his phone back in his backpack with a tired sigh. Kaken grabbed his hand to pull him into the plane, making Izuku sweat at the overly friendly looks from the plane workers who welcomed them aboard. Izuku looked around the plane in awe. It was like what he saw on celebrities' Instagram posts of them on private planes. It was nice and roomy. Izuku had never rode a plane before, but surely Kirishima will relax him. He was. The plane door closed, making his turn confused as the pilots went up front. Kaken pulled Izuku to sit down by the window where he looked to see Shiro and Kirishima waving at them. They were waving as Kirishima was getting in the driver's side of the limo, and Shiro, who was in the limo, waved with half his body out the window. The two worked fast at putting the luggage on the airplane, but that's not important to Izuku right now. Kaken, what about Shiro and Kirishima? Izuku asked, looking back at the older man panicked and confused. Kaken looked at him as if Izuku was the dumb one when this was all very last minute to the young man. This is for us, a married couple, to have a little getaway from extras. Including those two morons. Kaken explained as he removed his coat, groaning tiredly as he put a hand on Izuku's hand as he relaxed in his seat, ignoring the shocked expression Izuku had. Izuku was about to give Kaken a piece of his mind about how ridiculous this trip was when the plane began making him fall deeply in his seat, terrified and digging his hand into the arms of his seat. Izuku has never been on a plane before. But he knew for sure he was afraid of heights. His heart was racing as he felt the plane beginning to slowly move, making his brain racing with anxiety. Will this lead to an accident? What if he dies? What if Kaken sells him in another country? Scratch that, what if Kaken kills him in another country? What if the plane crashes? What if the pilot didn't know what they were doing? What if some crazy storm in the middle of the flight? What if he never makes it home? What will become of his parents? His friends? In Izuku's internal panic, he was suddenly the hand holding his spread fingers open to cling to him, making him look up to see Kaken, only for the older man to be looking off somewhere nonchalant. Which kind of made Izuku disappointed, but was thankful for the older man's simple attempt in helping him relax. Maybe Izuku should just go along with it. Would that be wrong? Who knows? But at least it could not be so bad. Maybe he can make the most of this vacation? Surely he could take advantage of this situation for a small break from school, right? Just him and Kaken. Just him and the older attractive man he slept with and got married to. This would work? Two were supposedly married, the two had and the two were here. On a plane, to who the F knows where. Kaken? Izuku asked, looking over at the older man who was still watching the TV with a nonchalant expression. As if he did not just take someone on a plane after their mother kidnapped him from his college. Where exactly are we going? Izuku was a bit afraid after all he heard him yell at Shiro and Kirishima. What if he gets mad at Izuku and just throws him off the plane? If they were on the ground, he would not be afraid to yell at him to tell him right away where they were, but Yuka was more worried about the plane landing safely. Thank you. Kaken seemed to be debating something, making the two sit in an awkward moment of silence with only the sound of the TV and the plane before Kaken spoke. He leaned in a bit close to Izuku's face, making the younger man back up a bit confused before he was flicked in the forehead. Watchin'. Izuku squealed as he pulled his hand away from Kaken's to rub the pain away. What point of a surprise would it be if I told you? Kaken huffed as he took Izuku's hand again to bring it down to the arm of the seat as he rested his chin on the other hand facing away from Izuku. It's not like I'm gonna kill you nerds, so calm down, Kaken murmured as Izuku frowned at the older man and glared at the TV in front of him, rubbing his head angrily. This trip was gonna be the death of him for sure. He was wrong to think that this trip could even bring him the slightest bit closer to liking the older man. Jiro has been working for the Bakugo for 5 years at most. Her family owed them for their help in saving her mother's life from a kidnapping. Sure, it was merely a coincidence her mother was captured at the same time they were attacking them, but still, she felt like she owed the Bakugo family her life for what they did. Her first encounter with the Bakugo face-to-face was when she went through hell with training. While she knew they were filthy rich. But she also knew they were hard to meet. But she managed. She had met Kirishima first, which was great as he drove her and still tried to make conversation to ease the tension despite him being bad with his English. He spoke with a hard accent and loudly. But she was fine as he seemed welcoming and genuinely friendly, though he was built and intimidating with his sharp teeth revealed. When they arrived at a building, one thing she could describe the environment was control. The people she passed in the office setting were moving with expressions that were focused and with motive. Movements were made with precision and discipline. No one was working with no effort. She was intimidated but determined. These people saved her mother. Her father passed when she was in college, and if her mother died, she did not know what she would have done. Her parents were supportive of her dream of music, as they too were in a career similar to music. Halfway through music school, she began losing interest, but her father's death took a toll on her, making her go into depression. Her mother's kidnapping was to get money from their father's will, but soon when a mysterious black car came dropping off her mother, a man told her to never mention Bakugu's being involved, which she swore. The cops did not dig any further, but aside from her mother being thankful, Jiro still felt like she had a debt to owe the family. A life for a life. Meeting the Bakugas was amazing. The woman was confident and loud about her beliefs, with a nice head on her shoulder thanks to her shy but a welcoming husband who would calm her down. Nonetheless, she was accepted into protecting the woman's son, who seemed to be the one who was there to save her mother. Jiro was pumped and nervous. He was the man who saved her mother's life and gave her purpose on what to live up to in life. Giving her life for the family would fill the debt. Her mother was supportive despite her worries, as she will now see her daughter less than ever out of her protection. However, the meeting with the man was rocky to say the least. I do not need a bodyguard, hag, I can take care of myself just fine," yelled a younger version of Mrs. Bakugu. Only his face was in an intimidating sneer of displeasure, and his hair was spiking upwards like his father's, then his mother's, which was more downward. She did not know much of the Bakugu history, but knowing the dynamics right off, it seemed that Mrs. Bakugu was in charge and her husband was more his own, being fine by his wife's side. While Bakugu Kastuki, their only son who was 5 years older than her, was fighting to take his mother's place. Bakugu Kastuki was not happy about having so many bodyguards. He always ignored them and would wave them off, giving them things to do and then be by his side. Not that she complained her ears needed a break from his yelling. He did not even call them by names, it was based on appearance. She was given the name Ears. Because her eyes had an odd shape, even if her haircut tried to hide it, he still noticed it on day one, making it her permanent name. He was an a-hole, he was arrogant and outright rude. Not to mention loud. He always spoke highly of himself and challenged anyone who questioned him. Anyone who tried to speak up to him was quickly silenced, either by brutality, blunt words, or his hands. He was not very forgiving to anyone who thought his attitude was shit. Jiro surprised herself not hating the man. Sure, he was a D, but under the cruel words and brash attitude, he was a good person. He meant well, criticizing people who worked for him and kept people in line from doing risky things that not only would harm the Bakugas but themselves. An example was stopping a man from heading to kill a gang rival who attacked his sister. Bakugu had to yell at him to stop him from acting irrationally. Without Bakugu, the man would have died with his sister. The sister was saved safely, and Jiro and Mina had to help clean the body of the person behind it. Mina seemed nice and was the first person she befriended, introducing her to Bakugu's other bodyguards, who were all surprisingly normal. They had their crazy quirks. Kaminari liked to torture people with electricity for info for the boss, and Kirishima was Bakuga's heavy lifter with his strong right hook. Mina was good with her sly moves, while Jiro was mainly good at hearing. She knew where to get the info and would share the news with the boss when needed. So life with the Bakugas was a headache to be entertaining with her new group of odd friends. Until Bakugu turned 30 years old. Now it was no surprise when his mom wanted to see him married. Or at least settled. Bakugu denied her advances and demands, however. Which often leads to violence. Not that they would hurt each other, just the environment around them. Guns, blazing objects are being thrown. Yep, just an average family visit. If anyone was hurt on the crossfire, that would be the time they stopped and chose to angrily sit while Misaru gave them a talk to. which was the time Jiro saw the two blondes look terrified as the usually shy man looked terrifyingly angry and the only time she would hear him raise his voice. Well, Bakugo agreed to one date his mother forcibly set him up on. It would be the last. Kami was the girl's name. She had big lips and was good-looking. However, she was not very bright. The whole date Bakugo was annoyed. From what Kirishima described, she knew he was trying not to let it rip on the poor clueless girl. And judging when he came home, he was in his office very upset after telling his mother how terrible the date was. Seemed the woman felt the same as she called Mrs. Bakugo first, just to say that the date was not her type. So when the others were off to the bar with Bakugo, she was sure her boss would feel better after a night out. Only it turned into a surprising night when she was about to head home only to be told a wedding was planned to happen in 10 minutes. People were setting the ballroom at fast speeds with food being cooked and entertainment being herself, as despite having the money there was no way of getting a band here under the amount of time given. So once everything was set, she was pondering who the married couple was but was not questioning the order her boss gave her on the phone sounding mildly urgent. A massive surprise when her boss, Bakugo Kastuki, the king of the underground, the man known to kill hundreds, walked into the room, smiling. Not just any other smile he had. His usual being threatening and sadistic when he would stomp on people's faces who were pleading for their lives with their hands tied behind their backs. The smile he had was soft and genuinely peaceful, though he looked very drunk. Eyes half-lidded as he led possessively onto a younger man with his face nuzzling the green curls on top of the innocent young man's head that had the biggest, brightest smiles. The dinner only had Kirishima, Kaminari, Mina, Siro, and herself. She was skeptical, not just of her boss's drunken actions of marrying a stranger, but how the younger man beside him looked like he was a complete sweetheart. How did he get Bakugo? Or better, how did Bakugo get such a soft, sweet man like him? He was drunk, so she believed it to be his answer. So when the two went on their honeymoon, she believed he would come back in a sour mood. Not for his embarrassing actions but for the man probably going to drop Bakugo because of his attitude. Bakugo was a good guy but his attitude kept him from making any actual relationship, not that he showed he cared much about that. But the next day was a complete surprise. He wanted the man and the man promised to wait for Bakugo, or so Bakugo claimed, to wait till Bakugo finished some important business out of the country first. Jiro sighed as she looked up at the night sky. Stars were barely visible in the city. And the smell of the city was shitty. She never lived outside the city, yet she knew how the fresh air smelled. And yet she never really wants to leave the city, since she was fine with how things were right now. Sighing, she loaded up her gun with a humming tone in her mouth as she looked at the loading dock. She was just enjoying a moment before she will be signaled to head on inside with the others. Izuku turned over in his sleep and sighed in content, hugging the firm pillow in his arms as he nuzzled his face in the firm object. Izuku felt so comfortable he did not want to wake up. For all he knew, the world was dead to him. Being with Kaken was nerve-wracking. But it was all worth being able to sleep in such a comfortable bed. The situation was not the best, but he should be able to take advantage of this. Free food and a nice place to sleep. But still, the older man was the thorn in his side. He was puzzling and alluring. He was handsome, sure, and not to mention confident with the way he talked, walked, and ordered people around. But he was arrogant, demanding, and made decisions for Izuku without consulting him about it. Izuku was his own person. Izuku needed to get him to know Izuku was not going to just sit like a dog and obey. Izuku was not going to be some toy for the rich guy to play with. He huffed in frustration in the pillows tiredly as he felt a nice comb through his head, making him smile. Nuzzling into the pillow, he felt relaxed. Like that, Deku? A familiar deep voice said, making Izuku wake up immediately with wide eyes to see he was not nuzzling into a nice firm warm soft pillow, but his supposed husband's tattooed chest. Izuku flushed deeply, recalling how he had fallen asleep on the flight and determined that the older man had brought them to their probably hotel room. That's when he noticed he was in a room that was surrounded by a clear wall that showed fish swimming around where they were sleeping, making him nervous and in awe over the view, hoping that the shield around them would not break. But that was not as important, as the older man's arm that wrapped him warmly was also the one messaging his curls. He was just happy he was wearing clothes. The older man was wearing some clothes this time. Izuku then mentally recalled the large third arm the man had the last time he woke by his side, making Izuku flush harder. He hated his brain for remembering that. The older man seemed to be in his own daze, looking mainly at Izuku's curls. Izuku wanted to say something, but his heart was in his throat and he felt like he was heating up to the point he could explode. The older man released him when a phone rang, making the older man grumble as Izuku sat up wide awake trying to slow his heart down. A part of him was disappointed in their separation, but he shoved those thoughts and feelings away as he took a deep breath to see not that he was out from under the covers. He was wearing some sort of silk matching PJs with his initials on his right chest. Izuku flushed at the idea of the older man changing him, but it should not be all that surprising at this point, since this was the same man who had kidnapped him and dragged him into his house to live with him. Izuku angrily glared at the fish. He loved to fish and would be happy if not for him being dragged here against his will by a crazy rich CC man wanting to stay married to him. He was in who knows where and his phone was dead due to him playing games halfway through the flight or listening to music, since he did not want to start an awkward conversation with the man. Izuku did not even want to be on this trip with him. Kirishima and Siro being here would have helped him avoid being alone with the older man. He sighed tiredly, rubbing his head, when fabric and another fabric hit him in the head and side, startling him. "Ah dash. Get dressed, we are going to go have breakfast," was all the older man said as Izuku heard departing feet. As he looked at what hit his head was a mint-color tropical print button shirt, and he saw jean shorts by his side. Huffing frustratedly as he was about to get dressed till he saw the older man taking off his pants, making him fall on his face due to his foot being stuck to the blanket. Kaken looked over at him with a raised brow as Izuku felt his face flush in embarrassment. After getting dressed, Kaken held his hand to guide him to the restaurant, and Izuku was just in awe. The older man went out for this trip. It was not as simple as Izuku thought it was going to be. This was like the real type of vacation rich people. Oh yeah, Kaken is rich? Izuku kinda liked it but hated it. This was not supposed to be happening, and it was all very wrong and off-putting. It was hard to feel relaxed and fully comfortable knowing the fact their marriage was an accident and that the two were not in any actual relationship. Izuku hated how it was a waste of a good vacation the rich man could have with someone he actually loved. And the ring on Izuku's finger, that Kaken held a bit tightly, kept reminding him that the older man could find anyone better than him as quick as light. Izuku was a nobody, so Kaken can have his fun and then forget about Izuku? Izuku could at least enjoy the moment, at least. Not like he liked the man, he had a dream to accomplish anyways. Before long they were sitting in an overly fancy restaurant which, like their room, was underwater surrounded by fish. Izuku found himself spacing out looking at the fish until Kaken would pinch his cheek and remind him to order himself some food. Izuku ordered the same as Kaken since he did not really know anything about the food. Which was understandable. It was all screaming money and wealth. Everyone was so carefree or so relaxed. He made Izuku try and also feel more in the moment, only for the older man across from him was a pain to his side. "Kaken, where are we exactly?" Izuku asked as the waiter took their menus with a frown. Izuku only really wanted to start a conversation cause the two are sitting here with nothing to do. "We are staying at the Muraka for a few days," Kaken said as he sipped his wine, looking at his phone for a quick second, for some reason angering Izuku. "We will need some time to ourselves since it has been some time since we got a chance to talk. We literally talked 2 days ago." Izuku thought to himself, not wanting to interrupt the older man. Now is a good time to do that since our originally planned honeymoon was put to hold. This makes Izuku do a double take. Was their honeymoon not at the hotel? Where they had steamy hot SEC at an expensive condo when he left Kaken? Our original honeymoon? Izuku could not help but ask, a bit flustered and confused, or even a bit shocked. "I thought the honeymoon was at that place we slept at? Seriously? Who the hell has that one night at some hotel condo as a honeymoon?" Kaken asked, furrowing his brows. "We were planning on going to go here, but you said you had classes," Kaken explained, looking at Izuku like it was obvious. "Well, it seems drunk me had done one smart decision," Izuku thought bitterly. Only if his drunk self did not marry some stranger. Maybe it would have been a good decision to marry a rich man he met at a bar when he was drunk, but with this rude man it was immediately negative. This honey was pointless once Kaken gets that they are not meant for each other and he meets a nice girl for him to actually marry. One that he will actually like instead of Izuku who was a broke college student. Kaken, we really did not have to do this since Izuku began, but the older man glared at him. We are married, so, of course, we should. And judging from your complexion, you need a vacation from your studies. Kaken huffed as Izuku felt a bit insecure at that comment. That is not what I meant. This a lot. And you should Izuku tried to speak. Deku, whatever you are about to say, stop it, Kaken said with a scowl, looking away with a frustrated sigh. Izuku clenched his fist under the table. Why the F? Was it wrong for him to say that the marriage was a mistake now? This man was frustrated, so was Izuku. Izuku was doing him a favor. He was acting like a child, not listening to reason. Izuku huffed annoyed as the waiter dropped off their food. Izuku was about to deny his hunger, but his stomach was in pain, so he took a fork and stabbed what looked to be a crab and ate. Only for his mouth to burn. It was spicy but not too spicy. But Izuku still felt his face heat up. But nothing he could not handle, as the food was amazing despite the burning of his tongue. He had ordered the same as Kaken mainly cause he could not pronounce the names. But he could tell it was shrimp with crab and corn. Kaken, what is this dish called? Izuku choked as the older man looked up from his food to look at Izuku with no longer a sneer on his face. He looked calm at first before his face formed into a sadistic smirk. But I figured you would have known since you wanted the same as me? Kaken said in a tone Izuku hated with how his heart fluttered. Izuku angrily ate as Kaken looked at him, unknowing of the college student lovingly. After this, we will be doing a few activities before heading down to a beach, Kaken said as he began eating his food calmly, as Izuku was too busy trying not to die due to the spice of the food. When Izuku thought the older man said an activity, Izuku sort of knew it was a couple's activity, but he was still hoping it would just be the older man and him doing something that could not have them interact. But, welcome to our couple's activity of the day, said the man who had blonde hair, a long neck, and wore a white button-down with jeans, which was odd. Izuku and Kaken with 4 other couples sat on their own respective towels in a clear area surrounded by sand and green trees not far from the beach, actually right by it. The man looked like he would work in the fashion industry or something. He did not seem like the type of guy who would be at a beach. I am your host Tsunago Hakamada. Please just call me Mr. Jean. Izuku had to bit back a laugh at that, as he did not want to be only rude but childish. I will be your instructor in this week's couple activity. I do want to be clear and say I am not here to fix your relationship entirely. He joked, making other people around them laugh, unlike Izuku and Kaken. Izuku was sure there was nothing to fix since there was no relationship to start with. I will merely help you all get you and your partner a better connection. As every relationship does have its ups and downs. So I will be there to guide you related to a better path. Izuku rolled his eyes after the man's speech. Everyone in a circle began introducing themselves, as well as Izuku and Kaken. I know that you two are newlyweds? Mr. Jean said, making Izuku sweat. Of course, he would pull that card to start a class. It was a lesson in college and all schooling for being the new kid. The teacher addresses the new kid or anyone with something to use to start the class. It happened to him once in elementary, making him get the nickname Green Bean for being used as an example for the color green. Yes, we are currently on our honeymoon, Kaken said calmly as a couple of girls whispered among themselves. And why might you two be in this class? Trouble already in paradise? Mr. Jean asked, tilting his head and looking down at the two. Izuku was sitting crossing his legs. Kaken sat with one leg laid out and another with his knee raised with his arms behind his head as he laid on the towel. He was dressed similarly to Izuku but with red, not mint-colored. He also had sunglasses. He looked like some playboy, a handsome mature playboy. I think we are fine, a dumb extra suggested we do this, Bakugo said dismissively, and Mr. Genist nodded while Izuku frowned. The other couples were whispering about how possibly their relationship was bad, which Izuku agreed 100% they were not meant to be together, but Izuku felt like Mr. Jean knew something Izuku did not, as his eyes looked between Kaken and Izuku, making him sweat nervously under the judging eyes. Well, why don't we start with you two as a demonstration for today's class? Mr. Jean said with a smile making Izuku sweat. Ha! Izuku could not help but croak. Izuku had never felt more embarrassed before in his entire life. Sure, there were a lot of times he was embarrassed about that haunted him at night. Like at a school play, he was a prince, and when he was supposed to defeat the beast and save the princess, he fell off the horse, it was a wooden horse, and cried in front of the whole school, earning him the nickname Crybaby. Then in middle school, he had a high pimple on his nose. And in high school, he was using his parents' card to buy some snacks and the card got declined. Okay, it worked after another swipe, but it was still embarrassing with the people lining up and the cashier giving him a judgmental look and offering to buy the soda for him. Izuku, however, was more embarrassed right now as he was sitting across from his husband in front of a class on how to demonstrate the first lesson of today. Communication, which was the problem the two have, sure, but it was very awkward to share such personal relationship problems in front of a group of people he never meet. Or the fact that Kaken was staring very strongly at the younger male, making Izuku flush under the stare and try to look anywhere but at the burning red eyes, which made Izuku's body misbehave. Mr. Jean stood tall, however, and pulled out a very ugly and bright red stick. "This is a talking stick," he said, and was answered with confused silence. "One couple will share their part, and when finished they will give it to the other partner. Like Mr. Bakugu here." Izuku thought he was going to give the stick to Kaken, but then when the red stick was in front of his face, he realized he was also a Bakugu technically, which reminded him of the dread of the situation. He huffed, finding this whole thing dumb and pointless. "Mr. Bakugu, you start off first," Mr. Jean said, but Izuku looked up at the man confused. But the man merely smiled down at him. "Say one thing you hate that your husband does, how it upsets you, and one reason why you love him." Izuku did not want to compliment the older man. There were probably no positive qualities about this man he supposedly married. But he does know a lot of negatives about him. With the red stick in hand, he had to hold back a smile. He did not want to anger the older man too much to the point he could murder him and leave his body to never be found. Call Izuku crazy and delusional, but the guy was rich, he could make anything happen. Kaken, Izuku took a moment to look Kaken in the eyes as he took that moment to come up with what to say. "I hate it when you make decisions for me, and I like your eyes." Izuku flushed as some of the women cooed at the cute display, making him flush. He was debating whether to say he hated the blonde's attitude or him kidnapping him on two separate occasions. Okay, one being his mother, but still. Izuku did not want to upset the guy. Well, it was not like he was some sort of criminal as far as Izuku was concerned, but he still did not want to bite the hand that was giving him food for free. Kaken seemed upset at the first comment, but the tension in his back relaxed after Izuku fully finished. He still had a scowl, but not very deep as it was before. "Good job. Now Mr. Bakugu passes the stick to Mr. Bakugu." Mr. Jean said as Izuku nodded and handed the red ugly stick to Kaken, which he did lazily. "Now you go, Mr. Bakugu," Mr. Jean said as Kaken did a lazy trick with the stick on his fingers. "I hate it when you complain about me doing things for you as husband, and I love you," Kaken said bluntly, immediately adding the stick back at Izuku for him to grab, making Izuku flush. The man did not hesitate, and Izuku did not know if he was upset or flustered. "You love what specifically of your husband, Mr. Bakugu?" Mr. Jean asked, which Izuku looked ready to die at any moment. Kaken huffed in frustration. "I love everything about him. How the hell am I supposed to choose just one?" He growled, making Izuku feel every part of him flush. "Kaken!" Izuku yelled, scandalized bright red. In short, Kaken and Izuku were excused early from class for the rest of the day. But at least Mr. Jean said he was proud of Kaken's devotion much to Izuku, which made the younger man flush in embarrassment. Izuku groaned in embarrassment as the two were sitting under a shaded area by the ocean while little to no people were swimming or enjoying the shade like them to eat fruit or drink. Bakugu looked over at him with a frown. "Eat some fruit, Deku, and just relax, stop freaking out over nothing," he said, closing his eyes to relax in his chair while the younger man glared over at him. The older man had just made it look like he was madly in love with Izuku, which was not true. This guy was using him for his image, and Izuku was deciding whether he should be upset with being used or upset with himself over him being angry, since the man had helped him a lot in the past few days. Izuku huffed, laying back in his chair, debating on arguing with the older man about what had happened earlier, but eventually decided he would rather eat some fruit than waste his breath. Besides, it was a free vacation despite the situation. Izuku ate a piece of watermelon as he sat up ready to go off to let his feet in the ocean. "I'm going to go get my feet wet, Kaken. I'll be back," he said, ready to leave to get some distance from this crazy man. "Oi, Deku, hold it." Izuku was barely getting his feet off the recliner when he turned to Kaken to be slapped in the face by the older man on both his freckled cheeks with something cold. "Watchin', what are you doing?" "Ice cold," Izuku said, trying to pull his face away, only for the older man to growl. "Hold still, nerd, I am putting this sheet on you so you don't get sunburned and cry like a beach." Kaken huffed, annoyed, as Izuku huffed, annoyed, and let the man finish his face and spray sunscreen on his legs and arms, before finally letting Izuku go as he lay back down in his outdoor recliner chair in the shade with sunglass, munching on a pineapple. Izuku meanwhile flushed as he walked to put his feet in the ocean. The older man was very odd. Izuku was not a kid, he could have done it himself. Though having the older man rub his cheeks made him flush under the older man's touch, since Kaken's eyes looked so focused and intense while examining Izuku's face. Huffing, Izuku put his feet in the cold water to look down at his reflection. He was so unsure now of what was going on with their relationship. What was the older man thinking? And why was he going so far for some broke college boy, Izuku? Sure, maybe it was Kaken wanting to keep his appearance in front of people, or maybe keep his mother off his back, but why go as far as he is right now with Izuku? Izuku was not handsome, he never really dated, and he was still in college. Call Izuku insecure, but it was true. Why might someone like Kaken want someone like him? It was not adding up, and it was making Izuku find it hard to feel relaxed, or even in the moment when he has so many questions that need to be answered by the older man who refuses to let him speak, or even listen to Izuku. Izuku was pretty sure the older man was not listening to him half the time they even spoke together at dinner, the first time they actually meet without alcohol in their system. Or maybe only Izuku was not drunk. Maybe the older man had an accident and mistook Izuku for someone else? Or maybe he was trying to use Izuku to get someone jealous. Or maybe Izuku was in some sort of prank that his college classmates were trying to pull on him. Well, unlikely, but still it was a possibility nonetheless. Izuku was interrupted from his pondering thoughts as a ball hit him, making him look down to see a floating beach ball with his hat that had fallen off. He had forgotten Kaken gave him that before he went off to soak his feet since he was too flustered. A wind blew, making Izuku's hat fly off onto the sand, luckily, so Izuku got away from the water to retrieve it. When he reached out to grab it, a tan hand was first to grab it before Izuku, making Izuku flush. Izuku yelped, pulling his hand away close to his chest, surprised only to meet with brown eyes. Izuku's eyes widened as he immediately took in the other's appearance. He had long brown hair, straight sand in a ponytail, and wore white beach-styled clothes that looked as though he was from a rich family and close to Izuku's age. The other chuckled. "No need to be so flustered," the guy said, hanging Izuku on his hat, which he took. "Thank you," Izuku said, bashfully putting it on his head. "I'm sorry, you just scared me for a second. I did not mean to offend you," Izuku said, flushing. He hoped the guy did not think he was disgusted by him. In reality, he was flustered by the attractive guy. The guy had a relaxed feeling about him, laid back and cunning, like a fox sort of way. Sneaky, maybe? "No, it's mine for scaring you," he said, smirking. Izuku felt his heart squeeze. He was just happy they had shaded his blush. "I am Rody Soul. You come for some vacation?" Rody had a hand out for him to shake, which Izuku slowly accepted, still a bit shy. "I am Emimbakugu Izuku. You can say that I am." "What brings you here?" Izuku flushed, remembering his last name. Him remembering he was married made his heart ache. There he was talking to a handsome guy his age, and he is married. OD is screwing with Izuku. "I just came here with my siblings. My old fart is on a business trip, and I wanted to take a chance away for us to get some fun," Rody said, looking behind him where Yusuke followed to see and little boy and girl splashing in the water, laughing happily. Izuku smiled at the wholesome scene. "Ah, I wish I had siblings," Izuku humored, which was true. Being the only sibling was pretty lonely, and his parents never really wanted any more children, as they seemed content with Izuku, which he both loved and hated since he was stuck playing alone. Rody looked back at him, tilting his head. Want to join us? We plan on playing catch. Rody said, making Izuku flush at the invitation. Rody was a bit taller than Izuku, and Izuku was a bit bulkier, not at all like Kachin's, and Izuku felt like he was like some girl being asked by a man on a date. Izuku flushed, opening his mouth only for big arms to wrap around his waist, silencing him and stopping his brain from thinking. He was pulled into a firm chest as a shin rested on his shoulder, nuzzling his cheek. Sure, we'll join you. A familiar deep husky voice said, my husband and I won't mind playing with some extras. Watcha-chin. Izuku wailed, flailing from the older man's hold, flushing in embarrassment. But the muscular arms were caging him and were unusable to move. The display was making Izuku turn red, and it made his heart beat fast. Bakugo, sir, how have you been? I see you changed a bit from the last time you came. Rody said, making Izuku tilt his head, losing the urge to fight Kachin's hold. Well, no surprise Kakin would come here often since he is obviously rich, but how did he know Rody? Tisk, I'm on a honeymoon with my husband. Kakin said, releasing Izuku, but pushed Izuku's hat on as if to keep it in place, making Izuku yelp with the hat, feeling as though it tightened around his head to the point his hair would be pulled out with the hat. I thought you would go to Dash. Rody said, tilting his head. This was the only place I can go where the old hag won't be able to go. Kakin growled, grabbing Izuku's hand as the younger man fixed the straw hat with a frown. He had pushed it on Izuku to the point it felt like it was cramping his curls, hurting him. Well, it's good to see you making some changes. Dad would like to see you. Rody smiled and looked back at Izuku. And your husband too. Izuku flushed at those words, looking away. He hated how his heart was running a mile per second when it was brought up that they were married, along with dread. It was embarrassing knowing he was just planning on flirting with this man when he was married. No, he was not technically married, was he? After the two talked, Bakugo and Izuku went back to their room. While they walked, Izuku decided to pop the question. Kakin, you know his father? Izuku asked, only to earn a furrowed brow. Yeah, his old man owns this place. Kakin said dismissively while Izuku's jaw dropped. What's with that face? Kakin said, confused. I just talked to a guy whose dad owned and designed where we are staying at. Izuku squeaked. It's like meeting a celebrity or some politician. And I had a chance to ask him about how his father came up with the idea. Izuku was immediately interrupted by Kakin's sudden huff, making him stop and feel ready to ask the man why he was being rude, not at all like he felt hurt if he found him annoying. He chose to stay married to Izuku. You can ask him when we go have dinner with him. Kakin sighed as he unleashed his hold on Izuku's hand to unlock their room. If you can even call it that. It had 3 rooms, a patio and a pool, despite there being a literal fucking ocean right by it. We are having dinner with him? Izuku yelled. He did not mean to, but never had he mentally prepared to meet someone who made the place he slept at, and felt such a lot put on him to meet the owner of the place he is staying at. Izuku already feared the man would hate him and probably embarrassed himself in front of him to the point Kakin is ashamed of him and just leaves him. Not that it would be a bad thing, but Izuku would feel so awkward riding in the plane back, or probably having to deal with the tension as he packs his things, or maybe has to be forced to pay the older man back. Izuku was broke already. He did not want to go into debt. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts from his cheek being pinched, making him whine. Wachana. Stop mumbling so much. The old man is not someone to worry about. Kakin huffed, taking Izuku's hand and pulling the younger man inside. Izuku flushed at the older man hearing him mumble, but shook it off. Kakin, I just want to make a good impression. I am from a different class and younger, so I am worried about what to talk about at dinner. Izuku sighed, which Kakin nodded in some sort of sign he is listening. Just talk about anything. He's not all that concerned about social stands. Just be you and everything will be fine. Kakin said, which calmed Izuku down as he turned to sit down. As Kakin went to the kitchen, he thought he heard Kakin mumble something about hurting or killing someone. Kakin? Izuku asked, looking over the white comfy couch at the older man's back. I asked if you wanted salmon for lunch while we watch TV. Kakin said louder. Izuku was not sure if that's what he said, but this was the first time Kakin was actually talking to him and listening to him. Yes, please. Izuku said as he faced forward to turn on the TV. He wanted to watch a all-night movie, but a murder documentary was more in the mood for him to relax. Sure, it was an odd thing to see how sad people were murdered, but the science behind getting the bad people caught were very interesting. So he put on Forensic Files with Kaken in the background cooking for a while, as he soon felt Kaken sit beside him placing the plate of salmon with lemon looking really fancy, but Izuku was shocked to see the older man had also made it with shrimp pasta and cut up fruit. Izuku felt like he would barely eat the huge salmon and much less wanted no fruit since he had so much at the beach already. "You watching this chit?" Kaken huffed, putting a blanket over Izuku. "Yeah, it's really interesting. When I took forensic science in high school, my science teacher would let us watch on Fridays." Izuku said, not noticing the older man and him were under the same blanket as he was more focused on the TV and the food. It was calming that the two were eating and watching the show without any interruptions. Izuku found himself leaning onto the older man. He flushed but did not move as he felt like it would bring it more attention, so he tried to focus on the TV and not move around so much. Eating the food made him full, so soon he found himself starting to drift off. He tried to fight it, but he felt so comfortable he thought he should close his eyes just for a few minutes. The older man was invested in the show as well, so it would not be so bad to let himself sleep on the older man's shoulder. However, he felt like once he closed his eyes, the fullness in his stomach made him feel more content than he had in the past years in college, that he knew a little that he would not wake up, so with all thoughts being put on halt, he was slowly letting the sleep take over as he felt something soft touch his forehead, but it could have just been his imagination as he let himself take a nice nap. Bakugo was enjoying the show. It was interesting, as the nerd put it, with how processes go, and despite him having knowledge of the human body, he found out a lot more than he did from anyone, even his old hag. Nothing too big but could be helpful. He noticed the nerd was starting to fall asleep and it was getting dark with the sun barely peeking in the now dark sky. He had kissed the nerd on the forehead like how his old man did to his mom when they would be having dinner. Bakugo huffed, looking at his sleeping husband's form. The nerd was not skinny, sure he had some muscle, but he needed to get some food. Just by judging the man's nails and lips, the fucker had been eating improperly. With the lack of color from his skin, he lacked sleep. Still, his husband was still adorable. But he needed to take better care of himself. He took in the moment where he was with his husband till he knew he had to get up. Having to call Mr. Soul to cancel dinner cause he did not feel like going to dinner or waking Izuku up. Besides, the nerd liked the shrimp pasta, so he will make that for dinner with a big dessert for the nerd. And he had originally planned on taking the nerd to the beach tomorrow night, which means tonight he needed to get updated quickly by not just Kirishima but Jiro with their mission. Kirishima was to keep Bakugo's business kept in line while he was away, and Jiro was to take care of some trash, then Siro was to keep Izuku's college assignments completed as the nerd would have done. Siro was smart and also knew to keep from making it obvious Deku was not doing the assignments. He had to slowly move from his spot to get in a different bedroom to call Kirishima. He had only his tank top on with his swim trunks and house slippers on. He planned on taking a quick shower after getting dinner prepped. "Hello, sir?" Kirishima answered immediately. "Everything going well?" Bakugo asked simply. "Hey Baku bro. Yeah, everything's fine over here. We had a little trouble with a worker, but they were dealt with." Kirishima said. Bakugo nodded. This worker was probably the one who leaked Izuku being with him. Always count on Kirishima to deal with matters quickly. "By the way, how is Midoriya doing? Are you two having fun?" Kirishima jokes, making Bakugo frown. "We are just fine. The class Mina put us in was shit though." Bakugo grumbled, peeking through the bedroom door to look at Izuku sleeping peacefully with the TV still on. "Boy, I heard the guy saved marriages. He also was a designer for a company till he decided to go a different career path." Kirishima said as Bakugo rolled his eyes. "Well, he fucking is." Bakugo then proceeded into detail of how the first class WNET, making Kirishima burst into laughter. "Oi, what's so fucking funny?" Bakugo closed the door to avoid the nerd hearing him whisper. Nothing. Just a joke, Kamionari texted me earlier." Bakugo doubted the man but decided not to waste any time on this fucker. "Tisk, whatever." Bakugo hung up and called Jiro. After finishing a call with her, he hung up and began starting on dinner, which was easy as it was shrimp with pasta with a side of broccoli, and for dessert chocolate cake topped with strawberry. All he needed now was a nice shower. He already called me. Sol, who already knew Bakugo would not show up tonight as he also had been aware of Bakugo's situation. So Bakugo took in looking at his sleeping husband kneeling beside him to turn his hands through the green curls as the nerd smiled, drooling like a moron. But she moron and only his moron. Oi. Izuku winced and shoved his face further in the coach. He was tired and did not want to get up. He was about to be comfortable again when a hand pulled his cheek, making him wake up in pain to rub his cheek. Ow! Izuku whined sleepily while sitting up slowly to see Kaken had crouched beside him looking angrily at the younger man. Wake up, it's time for dinner, Kaken said with a huff, not leaving Izuku's side. Izuku huffed, but since he was tired he let the older man pull him gently to the kitchen to sit down and eat. Izuku ate happily while still sleepy as he huffed in satisfaction. Kaken was talking but Izuku was half listening as he was really tired. So tomorrow we need to wake up early for that stupid couples class after breakfast, something about some shitty teamwork. The older man grumbled, stabbing his food. Izuku nodded. Izuku was mainly focusing on the food. The sleep was just what he needed, and the food made him more mellowed out. He really wanted a shore, though he felt dirty from the sand at the beach. Oi! Izuku snapped awake, opening his eyes more. Why is Kaken? Izuku said, feeling more awake. But that was mainly due to the loudness of the older man's deep voice. Tisk, Iz was asking if you would feel comfortable to ride on Mr. Sol's boat for dinner tomorrow. He grumbled, red piercing eyes staring at Izuku, making Izuku feel naked. Sure, I never really been on a boat before, so it would be nice, Izuku said to continue eating without much thought. Kaken looked a bit at him with a serious expression aside the pinch of his brows as his eyes looked down at his own food to eat a bit more as Izuku shrugged and decided he could be willing to talk to the older man to fill the silence. Kaken, how is your parents' business like? Izuku asked, unsure on how to start a conversation. Kaken, however, stiffened by the question. I know you guys do fashion shows and design, but I never would have suspected you being in such a field. I was forced into design because of my old hag. Bakugo grumbled, but he sounded somewhat relieved, but that could be all in Izuku's head. I did model a few of their clothing lines when I was a small brat, but when I turned 16 the hag finally let me decide for myself if I wanted to do it or not. Yusuke found it hard to imagine the older man as a cute kid but could see why she would want her son to model. He is handsome with a great complexion like her. Yusuke wished he could, but he had freckled cheeks and his face was pretty plain looking compared to how the older man looked, very much like a god with his ash blonde hair without his intimidating scowl to scare people away. But then again his tattoos made it sort of attractive. Bad boys were very hot. But Bakugo was more of a businessman. Yusuke shooed those thoughts from continuing. Modeling sounds tough. I can't imagine being in front of cameras or people, Izuku said honestly. He was scared of public speaking. It still surprised him that he had so many friends or friends at all despite his introvert and geeky personality. Kaken murmured something Izuku could not hear but figured it was nothing as he finished up his food stuffed full. Which was only a second of silence that made him feel too awkward to find anything else to talk about. I'm going to take a shower before bed. Izuku sighed as he got up, yawning when Kaken got up at the same time and took his dish. I'll wash everything up, Akan said, making Yusuke stand there for a few seconds mildly confused, whether to argue with the man or take a shower. Sighing, he chose to just take a shower then yell when he is out of energy. He started the bath and happily hummed as he stripped. He needed to call his mother soon as he finished his bath. Once in the tub he was in pure bliss. The warm water and bubbles made him feel clean. Izuku never had hot water in his dorm showers. The water was always cold, or the shower in the dorm would be broken to the point Izuku just had to wash himself in the locker room or wash his hair in the sink when no one was in the bathroom. And laundry? It is hard to do laundry with cloth soap being expensive. The cheap ones barely cleaned his clothes and the washing machines and dryers were broken to the point he would be forced to do laundry with the dark and light-colored clothes in the same load. Izuku was living the life, being spoiled so much by the older man. Sure, he felt guilty, a little. Not as much as before since the old man puts him through so much. Huffing, he finished up his shower, no longer feeling so tired when he remembered where he had to sleep. He was going to be stuck sleeping in the same bed as the older man as Izuku flushed, remembering that fact. But would it be inevitable? Izuku wanted to see the fish before going to sleep, and he was not going to tell the man paying for this trip to sleep somewhere else. Not like the guy will let some commoner younger male tell him where to sleep. Izuku can do that, he just sleeps beside the handsome man for one more night. Which he was 100% wrong. How the hell was Izuku supposed to sleep beside such a handsome man who held him so close to his chest? Izuku had gotten in bed after him as the older male was asleep before him. But then once he got in bed as quietly as he could, the older man caged him. Izuku had thought the older man was going to do more with his body, but not just a big spoon to the younger man who was trying to sleep but could not for the likes of him. And it did not help when he tried to count fish when the older male would nuzzle into his curls. Izuku was bright red and felt his body heat up as the heat behind him made him sweat. Izuku sighed and tried to bring his focus elsewhere, or he might just pop a bnur thinking of how a handsome older man of his dreams has his arms wrapped around his body like a loving husband. He had to study for school tomorrow, he was behind as it is right now, and he needed to also do some class notes to keep the information in his mind for the exam. Which would be easy since thankfully Kaken had packed his study cards and school supplies. Well, new school supplies. It was nice to have a functioning calculator that had buttons that were not stuck, or the screen being so hard to read he had to flash a light at the screen to see the problems. Izuku furrowed his brow. The older man was helping out with Izuku's so much, and Izuku had done nothing but go along with it. Sure, the guy kidnapped him, made him marry him and forced him on vacation, but that was more pro than con. But Izuku should at least do something nice in return. Not at all crazy like Kaken, and Izuku was not rich, so what can he do? Izuku thought for a second before he got an idea. That is not us. Bakugo looked down at the younger man that slurred those words. The younger man was clearly more drunk than he was. He had merely come out to keep his idiots from doing anything ridiculous. He was drinking some alcohol, keeping his eyes out as it was crowded. He owned the bar after all. Seeing how it was successful and noticed some college students came in for some drinks. Bakugo was just sitting at the bar, mostly being avoided by other extras who either feared him or were doing their own things. However, while he was minding his business, something hit his OOT, which I glared down at only to see some small cheap hero plush keychain that was dirty and obviously worn out. He picked it up to inspect it, recalling a memory of seeing a familiar face somewhere before. He had watched some cartoons of a hero and was a fan, but never got around to actually getting much into it when he got introduced to hunting and taking fighting classes. The plush keychain looked old, and he doubts it was even available to buy anymore due to how old it looks. Maybe he could clean it up, and with a few tweaks he could save it just for the nostalgia of his long-forgotten childhood. "Excuse me." Bakugo furrowed his eyes to the side of whoever interrupted him, only to look down to see some college student. Since he was wearing what was similar to the other college students and was a head shorter than him. He had a chubby face despite his slightly muscular body and freckles. Average looking if not for the big round green eyes and curly green hair that was uncontrolled. "That was mine," the young man said, pointing to the plush in Bakugo's hand. Bakugo narrowed his eyes at that. "Is it?" Bakugo said before putting it in his pocket, making the young man gawk as if the man had said something offensive. But Bakugo merely pulled out his wallet. "I will give you $500 for it." "That's not yours." The young man said, his eyes angry with his brows down and a deep frown, ignoring the money completely. "I am offering you $500 for it." Bakugo said again, not budging to return it. It was odd for him to want something so childish, but he felt more happy with it than without it. "And I see you," the young man repeated, stomping his foot, glaring up at the man, not backing down. "That is a limited edition Silver Age All Might keychain I won at an arcade for $45, and I will not give it away to anyone, not even a handsome rich man like you." Bakugo paused at that. This man was drunker than he was clearly, and he was appalled that this man went to stupidly spend $45 on an arcade game to win it. "Who spends that much on an arcade game?" Bakugo asked, crossing his arms. The young man glared at him, waving side to side, unsteady on his legs. "Who spends $500 on a keychain?" Bakugo huffed at this childish argument. It was over some plush keychain, sure, but no way in hell was he backing down. Who would turn down $500? The young man looked frustrated, clenching his fists. "It is Silver Age All Might. I would never give him up." All Might is the same thing. What could be so different about some dash? A huge flock to the head interrupted him. Bakugo was trained to dodge attacks and make attacks, one being able to paralyze a person with just 2 fingers. But he had let his guard down. You idiot! A true All Might fan would know that Silver Age All Might is the best. His Bronze Age and Golden Age are the second and third best, as the Silver Age was his very best, as it was his second to last costume before he retired. The young man explained and huffed in frustration. Now, Bakugo-san should rightfully be angry. After all, he just got punched by some college student in a bar, but with what the man just said and his drunken brain, he was more confused than angry with what the young man said. Bronze Age? He merely said, looking down at the drunk younger man, completely confused. What the F is a Bronze Age? You never heard of it? The younger man was offended and shocked. Not even. You have to see the movie to understand the importance. Before Bakugo knew it, he and the younger man were out the bar and walking drunkenly to head to the nearest movie theater. It was closed at the time. Bakugo decided why not humor the young man and pay for first-class movie to play it with his connections. After all, it was curious to see what the young man found the Silver Age All Might being so important. Bakugo opened his eyes from that dream, well, more of a memory. He huffed with a grouch look on his face as he glared down to see he was not hugging the nerd in his arms but fluffy pillows. He stood up and wrapped himself in a silk robe and slippers to go upstairs in a bit of a rush. He should have prepared if the nerd had tried running off again. The nerd probably wanted to go off on his own, but considering now he was a target for an unknown enemy, he could not risk that idiot going off on his own. Once upstairs, he looked only to be welcomed with a unique sight. It seemed that there was breakfast in bed being made as the nerd was looking through the book for guidance. The nerd was mumbling as he looked invested in the cooking book with a head and to keep the hair out the way, as the nerd was already dressed for the day. The nerd looked cute, but Bakugo was not going to ruin the moment since it was very evident the nerd was cooking a poorly breakfast for Bakugo. Sure, he was angry that the breakfast date he had planned would be cancelled, but it was better to see the nerd do something for him. And if the nerd was gonna cook for him, why stop him? After all, Bakugo is going to experience his little wife's cooked meal for the first time since they married. Forever. So he snuck back under the covers and pretended to fall back asleep. It took a few minutes and he heard the nerd curse a bit or move around. Until he heard the nerd began to approach the room where he positioned himself how he was before with muscle memory. He had made sure to put the robe in its exact position before he got up the stairs. So he felt the nerd's eyes on him. He had to hold in the urge to smirk. The nerd probably will wake him up with a kiss, not maybe a gentle whisper, "Kakin, wake up." Or maybe the nerd will do both? But to his surprise, he heard the nerd shuffle and began turning around to head out the room. "No, I should." The nerd mumbled before shuffling again, sounding closer. "Wait, but..." Then the footsteps sounded further again. Bakugo had to resist the urge to get up and tell the nerd to shut the F up and give him the breakfast, cause his pride refuses to let him. Instead, he made a sound of him waking, pretending to have just so happened to wake up. "What? Morning, Kakin," the NRD said, clearly startled but trying to sound as if he had not been standing there for literally 2 minutes carrying what Bakugo knows is his breakfast. Bakugo, however, had to pretend, so he rubbed his eyes, yawning in the morning with his usual brash attitude. "What you want, nerd? Why are you up so DMN early?" Bakugo huffed despite him planning on waking up before the nerd. "Oh, yeah, I guess it is early," the nerd said dumbly, looking away, guilty, trying to avoid the older man's eyes, which knew exactly why. "Well, I just thought about reading a bit and, well, since there was time and you were asleep, I thought about making breakfast since I was up." The nerd then placed a bamboo lap table which had slightly burned blueberry pancakes with butter and syrup, slightly overcooked eggs, and bacon that were over oily, and a side for shitty-looking cut-up fruit that had some of its skin on still, and not to mention still not ripe yet clearly. The nerd looked nervously and flushed as he clapped his hands. "It's bad, yeah, it's bad." The nerd then sat by the older man with a clearly embarrassed smile. "I'll throw it away and we can eat something over dash." But before the nerd could move in and stitch it, Bakugo got the fork and stabbed the eggs, making the nerd yelp as Bakugo devoured the eggs. The egg was too salty and the yolk was overcooked, not to mention crispy, as though the nerd had fried the egg instead. Could explain why it was oily like the bacon. Still, it was the first breakfast the nerd had made for them, and not to mention the first time he had tried a home-cooked meal that was simple and not presented on a silver platter. Good job, nerd. Bakugo huffed, continuing to eat while Izuku looked pleased and a bit flustered. Thanks, Kaken. The nerd sighed before turning on the TV in the room as the two watched an all-night movie while Bakugo enjoyed his food beside his husband. A mental note to make sure the nerd cooks for him from now on, ignoring the eggshell that he just bite down on and swallowed with the piece of pancake. Izuku and Kaken started the day right. Breakfast and were able to explore a bit of the island with Kaken dragging Izuku around when he would mumble a rant about a plant or shell he found. They were supposed to go to the second day of class today, but Mr. Jean just sent them to meditate on the beach after they were supposed to do trust falls, but Kaken obviously. Well, it was Kaken and would refuse to let anyone but Izuku catch him, and Izuku would fall, but this would only lead to Kaken to shove people out the way to catch Izuku, so Mr. G knew they were good in trusting each other and let them go. However, Izuku would believe that he would think otherwise, considering how much Izuku had been kidnapped by the man he had put Izuku in trust of. So instead of meditating, Kaken and him just walked around the island for now. Izuku had told Kaken they should follow the teacher's instruction, but Kaken purposely ignored it and would continue to drag Izuku around the island with his hand collapsed on Izuku's. It was silent, as it was merely the sound of birds and wind, which Izuku was itching to change as he did not do well in silence. There had to be something to talk about, or he felt like the awkwardness would kill him. But before he could get a word out, Bakugus, Izuku turned as Kaken huffed in frustration, probably due to the peaceful quiet being ruined. Maybe Izuku was saved on avoiding to start a conversation? Rody! Izu greeted, smiling at the young man who looked to be holding a pink bird on his finger. Rody nodded to him in acknowledgement as the bird chirped cutely. You brought your shitty bird? Bakugo growled with no real threat. The bird was cute and Izuku released Bakugo's hand to get closer. Pino is my pet bird that my dad gave me when I was 16. He said as he affectionately scratched the bird's neck as it leaned into the touch. She is very friendly, never bites, and you can hold her. The bird went to Izuku's finger, making Izuku smile as the bird made kissy sounds. Rody went behind him to Kaken, unknown to Izuku, who was distracted by the bird. My old man has something for you to see at dinner tonight. Rody said his face lacked the friendliness it had the other younger male, making Bakugo cross his arms with a stern look. Those BS stewardess trying something? Bakugo murmured, eyes still on his husband who was talking to the bird as the bird spoke brokenly to him. It was no surprise that Bakugo was backing up the guy's dad's project and also protecting the island. See, Mr. Soul had been involved with the wrong group. More of a cult who wanted to use his engineering to create a weapon, something to not only bring them money but could destroy peace in the world. Bakugo was just there being one to kill the fucker who tried to steal some of their products to make it, which was pure luck to run into Mr. Soul and save millions or thousands. Still, the man and his children were still in danger if they were found unprotected, as any angry group would want him dead after they had lost everything thanks to the Bakugus. No, it's a different group. Rody murmured, making Bakugo raise a brow. These ones are visitors, and I caught them trying to head to your room while you two ditched dinner to have your lovely movie date. Bakugo would yell at him about the small teasing, but he was mostly focused on who would want to attack them, considering Jiru has told him of their successful mission on killing off the BSTRD who threatened Izuku's life. So who else? Well, they could be after Bakugo, but then wouldn't they have just killed him off right now while his guard was down? And they must know Izuku is with him, meaning they could be put off at getting caught, but then again they were caught nearby them, plus they could have killed them while they were walking around the island yesterday. Strange indeed. Thinking deeper into it, he had been letting his guard down too much this vacation. Still, no need to dwell on the past, he should make a few calls just in case. Deku, come on, let's go check out this fucker's old man's house. Bakugo gumbled, which Rody nodded, understanding this was a matter that should be dealt with quickly. Izuku, who was busy looking at the cute bird rubbing against his cheek, turned to his husband confused as they were going to explore the beach a bit more, and even a souvenir Izuku could give him, like a shell or a necklace made of shells. But then again, this guy was rich. DMN Izuku found it hard. Oki Kaken. Izuku followed along happily to meet Rodi's father all the same, taking Kachin's hand and my instinct with the bird on his shoulder. Rodi, your bird has beautiful wings. I have never seen a bird like this before. I am not sure. But Pinot is a beauty, Rodi said as Pinot fell on his shoulder. She can mimic me sometimes and keeps me company when flying my plane. Wow, do you fly a plane? Must be nice. I can't handle heights well, but Kakin helps, Izuku joked but drifted off realizing he was about to say something embarrassing. How is your dad doing? Sorry we missed out on going to dinner with you the other night. Rodi shook his head dismissively. No, it's nothing wrong, besides something came up for us also. Ah, I see. Izuku nodded. It must be nice having siblings. I was an only child so it was pretty lonely. Izuku joked while Rodi chuckled. Oh, it gets pretty crazy, every day is a new adventure. Rodi sighed as Pinot chirped happily. Rodi was easy to talk to as they walked. Kakin however held Izuku's hand and would occasionally make a comment or a rude comment, although all of them were rude, but Rodi seemed used to them and only would roll his eyes and smile. Once at a house that was huge, and further from anywhere on the island hidden behind palm trees. Izuku was led in by Kakin and immediately two familiar kids ran up to him and Rodi caught his attention, missing Kakin leaving his side. When he did, he saw Kakin heading into a room shutting the door as Rodi said something to his younger cute siblings. Kakin? Izuku asked to walk to the door only to feel Rodi put an arm around his waist and feel a fabric cover his nose. His first insect was to breathe in, which made him smell a very familiar fragrance, one he had smelled before. Sorry Mr. Bakugu, we any dash. Izuku did not pay much attention as he closed slowly. His final thoughts were trying to scream for his husband. I put him in our basement safe room, do not worry, we put the snacks you suggested he liked and some entertainment if he wakes up. Mr. Soul said, opening a cabinet to pull out a metal case as Bakugu closed all the blinds and lights. Just my luck. I get my fucking honeymoon and some moron wants to ruin my fucking mood. Bakugu growled as he finished putting the tarp on the wooden floor as Mr. Soul's eldest son rolled his eyes. Come on man, the quicker we catch these guys the faster you two can get to the beach with that surprise you made me set up. Rodi said, popping his back. Bakugu huffed as he let his sleeves roll up. The faster we do this the faster I can treat him to lunch then continue our walk on the beach. He growled. Despite his strong dislike in sand getting everywhere, he enjoyed seeing his husband looking so happy with his straw hat and painting at things while mumbling. So it was a fing pain to have to wait it out till the fuckers following them get here since all sincerity were dismissed. And b, despite how welcoming and plain the house comes off, it was built and made in order to protect Mr. Soul and Bakugu himself. Mr. Soul was a good friend and sure Bakugu and him met under circumstances, but he was a good man for his kids. Bakugu may be a killer, or may have ruined people's lives, but he had his reasons. And he was human as well. He knew good people from bad and he was neither. He was Bakugu Kastuki and like hell he would label himself or follow anyone else's morals but his own. Any idea who it could be? Rodi asked, looking between the blind before his father pulled him back. No, and go downstairs with your siblings. Mr. Soul said. Rodi looked ready to retort but he shut his mouth and compiled. You need my help Mr. Bakugu? Bakugu only landed another handgun signaling for Mr. Soul to nod and head to his office in the small attic to give Bakugu the signals from his camera. I think he looks pretty with this one. Izuku scrunched his eyes, swatting weakly as what was pulling his hair. His hair is so soft and curly. A giggle was heard making Izuku huff in trying to get his brain to think and process. Come on guys, let the poor guy sleep. A deeper voice chimed in making Izuku shake before opening his eyes to see two familiar children giggling. Where.h? Izuku groaned, looking around trying to, when Rodi popped by his side. Sorry one of the kids threw a toy at your head and you got knocked out. Your husband and my dad had some business meeting upstairs. Rodi explained as Izuku furrowed his brows. Did that happen? Izuku was sure he walked in the house before Kakin left him and then. It got blurry. Sitting up he heard the two children squeal when he felt his hair realizing they had put hair clips. And he put his hand on his face feeling dried off paint. Rody covered his mouth to hand him a mirror of himself looking like the Joker. Izuku did not find it funny, frowning over how cheesy of a joke this was, but Rody and his siblings were dying. Izuku looked around the basement and it looked really nice. An ice pack was surely enough on the back of his head and the couch was very comfortable. This basement would look like any average basement with toys on the floor and a couch and TV, but with the see-through walls of Sish life almost surrounding them, it reminded him how poor he was before. Izuku sighed and got up to the restroom. Rody followed him into to wash the paint off his face as Rody's siblings began watching TV. Sorry I tried to stop them, but I was curious as well. Rody sighed with a, well, you can make it up by taking the hair clips from my hair. Izuku huffed as taking one out was painful with how tight the small rubber bands were. Sure thing. Rody began helping him and Izuku started talking to him. Sue, how long has your dad known Kaken? Izuku asked. When I was young, probably 10 or I don't remember. But I know that he was a massive D, no offense. Rody said, to which Izuku nodded. No, it's alright. His personality is a bit rough. Izuku knew that much and he only knew him for a few days. But he is a good guy for sure. He has great friends he works with and his mother was really nice when I met her aside some of. Well, Izuku flushed cause how was he supposed to exactly explain his drunken one-night stand lead to him marrying a woman's son? He seems better now than when he last visited, so you definitely are making an impact. Rody sighed as Izuku tilted his head confused. Last time he came was 1 year ago. His mom or old hag set him up on some date. He was set off and came here for a month. And when I tell ya, Rody blew out some air from his mouth, eyebrows raised. He did not hold back on releasing some stress by starting fights. Oh, I can never imagine Kaken doing that. He just yells and pouts. Izuku said, confused. Would Kaken really be capable of doing something so violent? Sure, he was buff and tall with an intimidating glare and not to mention that tattoo on his chest making him seem like some gang member, but he never was violent from what Izuku could tell. Well, he did meet him not too long ago. Izuku heard some thumps from the room above with what sounded like yelling. They must be watching that movie. Rody groaned, snapping Izuku out of his thoughts. My dad is addicted to World War remakes, his favorite being All Quiet on the Western Front. I can't watch it, it's too brutal for me to handle. Izuku shivered at the fact that he hated gore movies or sad movies, that he mostly preferred ones with happy endings. All Quiet on the Western Front permanently scarred him for life with so many details that stick to him. From the hands on the fence to the boots being traded from one person to the next. He has heard of a remake, but the original had such an amazing work with detail and effort put into it. Though personally he would not want to watch it as a whole alone. Want to head up the stairs and check it out? Rody asked, which Izuku immediately shook his head no. No, I am good, let's just leave them to their own meeting. Besides, I kind of like watching Bluey aside from me being in college. Izuku jokes, heading to the couch where the siblings were on the floor looking up at the TV screen. Wilk Rody wiped sweat from the head. That was close. He would not know what to do if the guy had said yes. He looked up and the muffled sounds of yelling turned to shouts. He kind of wished his father did not have gone to that side of the world, where his father was used to seeing things that man Bakugo would do since he was 13. I told you everything, I swear. Sobbed the beat-up man, face swollen from many punches and blood pouring from his nose as the rope tying him to the chair made his aching body go numb from the cut of blood flow, and the burning flesh in the air from his unbuttoned shirt revealing where the letters K were burned into. A shot was all it took to shut the man up. Bakugo huffed satisfied as Mr. Soul wiped sweat off his forehead from clearing up the other two bodies. There were a lot of shootings, but they were no match for a man like Mr. Bakugo, who was raised by one of the well-known underground assassins. Bakugo growled in frustration as he put the gun on the counter as he used a rag to wipe blood off his face and chest. I need to call Shitty Hair and tell him the guy they got was not the mastermind, it's someone behind the fucker they got. Bakugo said as Mr. Soul nodded while getting his phone. I will do it for you, I will handle the mess. Meanwhile, I will have to suggest that you return home. Mr. Soul sighed, making the ash-blonde man glare at him for explanation. This was just the beginning, it could jeopardize this place and cost business. I also do not want my son getting involved. However, I will gladly welcome you back after you have things settled. Bakugo wanted to rogue. This was his and Deku's actual honeymoon that was not half-butted. But the older man had a fair point. He needed to regroup with his old hag and plan before he could put Deku at risk. They were able to predict the attack just in time, but no doubt it would be 2x worse the longer they stayed with people on the island with them being at risk. We'll be back alright, and I'll have Jiru send money as compensation for the mess I made. Bakugo sighed as he put on his shirt that was still clean from blood. Have someone pack our things for us too. No doubt my husband will be displeased with the change of plans. Mr. Soul nodded and the two walked out the office, shutting the door. The only other rooms that were ruined were the living room and the dining room, but the door shut allowed no one to see. And good thing they did, as it was Mr. Bakugo's husband followed by Rody. Hey Dad, is it alright if me and Bakugo's husband check out my plane? Rody said with a smile as Izuku seemed excited. Sorry son, Mr. Bakugo actually has plans with his husband right now. Mr. Soul said. Bakugo nodded and took his husband's hand, who looked up at Bakugo with furrowed brows. Bakugo waved to Mr. Soul. Come on Deku. Bakugo said gruffly but gently pulled his husband to follow, and it could be Mr. Soul hallucinating the affection and admiration in the tall man's eyes that were once filled with coldness and internal rage and thirst for violence. But the way the man's face softened by looking at his lover was a cold ice to Mr. Soul to know that the beast like Mr. Bakugo was capable of love. His son Rody stood by his side with a tired sigh. He's a bit young to marry that guy. Mr. Soul chuckled and shook his head, ruffing up his son's hair, earning him an annoyed groan. The cleaning crew will be here soon, go take your siblings to ride with you. Mr. Soul sighed as Rody nodded. Kaken, where are we going? Midoriya was pretty sure he had grown some senses with knowing if Kaken was planning something without his knowledge. It was odd for Kaken to not want to take Izuku on a plan to see around the island, considering that this was the same man who wanted to take every opportunity to spend time with Izuku. The ash-blonde man took a moment as the breeze flew through and the sound of the island around them made Izuku guess he was right. I hate to do this, but something has come up, so we will need to end our honeymoon early. Bakugo said, not facing Izuku. Izuku, well, should he be upset? He had needed to study, and he did not want to go on the honeymoon in the first place, but he would be lying if he said he hated the trip. It was fun and the food was amazing. Not to mention Kaken was great to be with. Despite the lack of communication and Izuku feeling like he had no say in any matter. But this was understandable. Kaken has a company, and a lot of people working under him, and not to mention he was someone important. He should be focusing on his business than a broke college student like him. Oh okay Kaken. Izuku said with his best calm voice, cause was not at all affected by the news. Izuku was thrown in for a loop when Kaken leaned down and kissed him on the forehead, making Izuku flush bright red. The older man was not fazed as he suddenly embraced Izuku in his arms, making Izuku's heart race. I'll make it up to you, I will take you anywhere you want as soon as everything is settled, he said as he then looked down at Izuku with his deep red scarlet eyes, making Izuku flush and only nod while shoving his face in the older man's chest. Izuku was in a daze after that. He never believed being hugged made him feel anything before, as it was natural for him to do when greeting friends and family, but this? He felt safe and he felt like he was something special. Izuku was not going to lie, he was, perhaps even a little bit, aroused at the idea of the older man towering over him, which obviously was no surprise there. They had SEC before, no doubt. Obviously his body would be horny when a man is handsome like his husband. Had not only slept with him but would touch him randomly. It did so much to his heart, and Izuku will need to work on this in the future to avoid an accidental bnur. The plane ride was back on. Izuku had his head on Kaken's shoulder as they watched a new horror movie. It was hard to pay attention to the movie because the older man's breathing was what his ears paid more attention to, and with how the older man's hands were bigger than his, and how the older man would rub gentle circles on Izuku's hand when he got scared by the movie. Izuku was never afraid of horror movies because they were predictable. But with his full attention on Kaken, it was terrifying when out of nowhere someone or something yelled or screamed. Izuku was very tired after a while and slept for a bit, until he woke up to Kaken feeding him, making him flustered. He offered to hand-feed Kaken, who swallowed him too, and Izuku was very anxious in doing the same to not accidentally stab the back of his mouth or hit the older man's teeth. When Kaken had finished eating, Izuku was about to reclaim his seat when Kaken pulled him in his chest, making Izuku yelp in surprise. Before he could protest, Kaken had his head on Izuku's shoulders, snuggling in his collarbone and neck, making Izuku freeze. "Kaken?" Izuku whimpered, but no answer came. Izuku huffed, and despite his struggle the man's big arms kept him in the embrace, making Izuku sigh as he decided it was comfy enough to sleep in the man's arms, so he was able to pull a blanket to cover them and with a bit of hesitation laid his head on Kaken's head with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Bakugo? Mr. Bakugo?" Bakugo opened his eyes with a scowl. Before his expression softened, seeing his husband curled into his arms in content. He ran a hand through the green curls, chuckling at how the nerd face was smiling with some drool falling from his mouth. It was a pain in the butt. Their honeymoon was cut short, but he will make it up to his husband twice as much. "Mr. Bakugo." Bakugo glared at the person who dared to yell at him, ruining his moment with his husband sleeping in his arms. They were lucky his husband was still asleep in his arms. He could teach them a lesson in raising their voice at him. The person who looked to be one of the people who served them sheets stiffened and began trembling, as they should. Sorry, sir," she said, bowing deeply. But there is a police officer outside the plane waiting for us to get out." I am sure this is all a misunderstanding, sir," a nervous officer said as Midoriya, now wide awake with a blanket over his shoulder, rubbed his eyes as Kaken held his hand as they both sat at a police station. "Kidnapping is a serious matter, me taking my husband on vacation beings a kidnapping, then sue me," Kaken growled. To be honest, Izuku was not very surprised considering he was sort of kidnapped on 2 or 3 occasions by his supposed husband and mother-in-law, but he was not going to tell the officer that comment. The nervous officer sighed. "Clearly it's a misunderstanding seeing how you two are married," he murmured when Izuku almost jumped. Of course, Todoroki. Sending that text and not texting them for a while would be so suspicious, and out of nowhere for his friends that Todoroki would contact his dad. Midoriya suddenly leaving school in the middle of a stressful part of the semester where he would usually go studying with them, or be cramped in his dorm till he was dragged out crying and trying to cling to his studies to avoid forgetting any small detail that could be used in finals. His friends would obviously be worried about him, since he would do the same if Ochako out of nowhere left the dorms and didn't text him details she usually would, like sweets she ate or craved or questions about his day or school. "Ugh." Izuku groaned, slapping his hands on his face, earning a puzzled Bakugo who softly bopped him on the head. "Okay, stop panicking, it's a misunderstanding, we are not going to jail," he said gruffly, making Izuku use all his power to not say, "Actually, Kaken, you might." Izuku knew Shoto was protective of his friends, and with what happened to his older brother, his father was more so of Shoto. So if Shoto, though Izuku was kidnapped, his dad would use all his power to help. Not only cause Izuku was friends with Shoto, but also cause, despite his intimidating look, he was a caring person who was very serious about the law and well-being of people. "Mr. Bakugo." Izuku looked up to see Shoto's father in his usual suit. "Sorry for calling you in, and I assure you I know this is all some misunderstanding." "DMN right," Kaken said, taking Izuku's hand, who flushed a bit as Endeavor looked at the ring. "I'm sorry for worrying your son, sir. I should have told them Izuku was quickly apologizing when Endeavor interrupted. "It wasn't my son who called in for this. Was your father?" He sighed as rubbed his face. Izuku paled and squeezed Kaken's hand out of anxiety. Of course that was the worst thing to happen. His dad and mom were no doubt to assume he was kidnapped. At least Shoto would not make a big deal over him being married, but his parents? He would never hear the end of it. Wait, why was he acting like this? He was forced to play along. Maybe this was the perfect chance to speak up. But Izuku felt his heart feel heavy at that idea. Kaken sure did kidnap him on multiple accounts, but he never did anything to Izuku. Like harming him, physically or sexually. Hell, they didn't even kiss. The man never laid a finger or raised his voice. And he would be lying if he said he didn't enjoy Kaken's company despite his attitude. He was clearly a good guy who wasn't forcing Izuku to do anything he didn't want to. Well, sometimes yes, but at least nothing worrisome. And he was an amazing husband who treated Izuku right. Not like a princess or tolerating but amazing. Izuku. Sweetie. Izuku jumped at that voice, his mom's usual worried tone ready to burst in tears with echoing sounds of her heels. Probably the same black heels she kept since Izuku's graduation from middle school, which she had been gifted by his dad after his first check working an actual stable job. Kaken sat up straighter and looked more tense, making Izuku hold his hand a bit tighter cause he knows how his mother is going to possibly react to the ring on not only his finger, but the older man's finger. Mrs. Midoriya, please. An officer could be heard trying to stop her, but after he heard his father's voice. My son is in there. We have to know he's alright. What was he doing on a private plane out of all places? Was he involved in anything? Endeavor sighed as Izuku flushed in embarrassment. Would not be the first time they believed Izuku was involved in drags or kidnapped. Okay, he was sort of, but he's not telling them that they were right. Let them in. Todoroki's father said, rubbing his face. Izuku knew that anyone outside the interrogation room saw his parents reacting like they were, and it was flattering as it was embarrassing. The officer on the other side opened the door, and before Izuku could breathe, his parents were on him, squishing him in a tight hug. Aiza, my baby, are you alright? You hadn't been texting or returning our calls, and then your friends didn't know where you were. His mom babbled, squishing his face as his father inspected his clothes. You better not have been selling any drags. Where did you get the money to get this shirt? If you needed money I could have sent you. Izuku just sat there flustered in embarrassment as he noticed Kaken looking at him from the side with their hands still intact, and he did not mind. He looked like he was going to tease Izuku for this later. Mom, Dad, I need you to calm down. Izuku said, pulling out of their grasp. There's something. Yes, there is something. His mom said, hands on her hips. What were you doing going on a private plane, and why was your dorms cleared out? Why didn't you tell us anything? If you needed help, why on earth didn't you tell us? Your father could have sent you money. I'll tell you. Izuku said, unconsciously waving his arms. Let me breath. Kaken was finally noticed by Izuku's father, however, who saw the ring on both their fingers. Now his mother was emotional. That's where Izuku got a lot of his traits, crying when he was happy or overwhelmed. Why does he knows a lot about doing laundry and a bit about cooking? However, his father. You're married, Tothisman? His father yelled, making Izuku wince as his mother pulled his hand to look at his ring with very wide eyes. There was a long moment of awkward pure silence. His parents just stood there, looking at his ring finger. Izuku noticed Mr. Todoroki was taking his cue to leave, and boy was Izuku wishing he could do the same. His mother and father were going to lose it, weren't they? They were going to take him out of college, deny him seeing Kaken. Which was a tough spot. He liked Kaken, yet they were not in any actual relationship aside from what was signed on paper. Would Kaken? Izu, a cold, even tone his mother never used, said, making him jump, looking up at his mom, who was usually small and chubby but looked taller to him with his father as her shadow. Go with Mr. Todoroki. Izuku began sweating, and out of pure instinct. Mom, please, I love Kaken. Izuku spat before he could register what he was saying. But his mother's eyes said there was no argument. So he looked at Kaken, who was a bit tense but looked unfazed, nodded in acknowledgement as he squeezed Izuku's hand before Izuku stood up and leave the room as Mr. Todoroki slowly closed the door to the interrogation room. Bakugo Kastuki, 3 years old, shot an assassin who was trying to kidnap him, who made the mistake to carry him where he could easily grab the gun, which was not in safe lock. At age 9 he hunted his first lion on his father's and mother's vacation trip. After their talk to him about not hunting endangered species, he was given his father's gun, which he had stolen from his father's office, to kill that very lion. At 12 he was introduced to his father's men and had begun his proper training after his old hag finally caved in, letting him into their world. She and the old man wanted him to live a boring life, but he saw more thrill and more power than just living a boring everyday life. A life where he has to do the same day over and over to then just die was boring and unappealing. Kastuki wanted more. He wanted to live a life of danger and conquer it. He knew his parents' love story. It was popular. Everyone gushed about the tale of the top assassin falling for her target, who was the son of the top group of the underworld. But he hated it. His old folks began focusing on their feelings than the business. Love being their true weakness to rising to the top. For true power and strength he put away all his weaknesses. Of course he was not some monster or villain but no fucking hero. He just does what appeals to him. Selling products from out of the country, kill a few fuckers, and sell some illegal products to smaller gangs. Ruining a bar and club in different areas to crack down on anyone however that even wants or thinks of ruining the peace in his turf. Through the years he feared no one, as he in the underworld was the definition of fear. His dragon-tattooed chest to show his strength, and people loyal to follow him and smart enough not to. However, right now he was sweaty, hands feeling clampy, with his mouth dry. Feeling the urge to want to hide. But of course not bowing to it as he sat across two people who were smaller than him, and yes weaker, easy to just kill instantly. Make them disappear from records, but he couldn't. Cause for very important reasons, like for example they are his fiancée's parents. AKA his going-to-be, or are. His in-laws. The mothers are clearly looking at him like a lion looks at their prey, studying him. She looked like Deku, his round green eyes and chubby face. But his father had Deku's curly hair, only black not green like Deku's mother, and Deku's father had Deku's freckles. Only Deku was his nerd who was easier for him to talk to and lead a conversation with. But these two, he could not. He felt the need to keep his face from scowling, the need to be respectful and to make the best impression, avoid cursing and to be on his best behavior. Which was not him, he would be the one people should know their place, but... So, you married my son. The women said sternly and Bakugo gulped. Gulped. The room felt tense. So tensed, usually he could simply kill her and her husband and all that. But of course not only was she and her husband the parents of the love of his life, but also because he was in a police interrogation room, he would be at a huge disadvantage trying to cover that up along with an angry husband. Yes, ma'am. Bakugo said while meeting her eyes. Her husband merely tried to look intimidating, but even though he was not like Deku and his mom with chubby faces, he still looked dorky with his freckles. The mother was intimidating with her eyes despite the chubby face fat and being short. Tell me, how long have you two been married? Inko asked, hands tightening together on the table. A few days. Bakugo was sure it was a month, but his brain was fried from intimidation, afraid of saying the wrong answer. Did you two have a sissy? Inko said firmly, making Bakugo red. One time on our wedding night. Bakugo coughed. How long have you two dated? Inko huffed. That we married the same day we met. Bakugo paused before nervously feeling his throat dry up. There was silence, for a long moment before the woman sighed. I do not know what you plan on doing, she laughed bitterly. You come from a wealthy background that I can tell. But my son, we had to find ways to support ourselves. We lived in a neighborhood where I had to put a couch on the front door to keep people from coming in. Where I had to keep Izuku from men who were out of jail for God knows what. He's a sweet boy. A good-hearted kid who saw the good in everyone despite where we lived. Bakugo listened, looking down, feeling for the women. He grew up with the luxury of protection, a stable home. While his husband, every day in his childhood, must have been fearful that one day his parents would be unable to make payments for their home or food, and an unsafe neighborhood. I know men like you. Inko continued. Bakugo looked up to see tears in the woman's eyes as her husband had his hands on her shoulder. You think it's fun to play with his heart? You plan on leading him on with your money and vacation to what? One day leave him for someone better? I'll tell you this right now, if you think you can get tired of my son and leave him anytime you can, I dare you. My son has no time for men like you who only want to have fun and throw people away like they're nothing but your toys that can be replaced. My son is worth more than what you can bribe him with, so end this game of yours and leave my son alone so he can focus on a realistic lifestyle. There was silence as Inko sniffled and whipped her eyes. She loved her son, they always wanted to do their best for Izuku. Izuku will be able to move on from this. She fell for a rich man, who told her things, gave her gifts. He told her he would give her the world. Only when some girl who had bigger eyes, bigger bears, had a more clear skin, and had parents who could buy her a car came in, he left her. No more vocations, no more wonderful gifts, and no more mind-blasting dates with her in his arms. And the job he gave her father? Fired him for leaving her, and her father broke him dying from sickness and her struggling in classes. If Hisashi had not met, she probably would have died. Izuku and him gave her life, something worth fighting for. Sure, their act was a spur of the moment. But Hisashi, no matter how demanding she was, how critical, and how much she cried, he stayed by her, going through nights comforting her and cooking food she craved. She never wanted Izuku to be as naive as she was. She never wanted him to suffer as she and her husband had. Game. She sat straighter at the man's deep voice. There is no game. This was never a game. Your son is a nerd, obsessed with All Might. The ash-blonde man looked up at her with determined eyes as he continued, whenever we watch a movie, he cries over the simplest of things. When he cooks, it's shitty, but he puts his whole soul into it. And when he talks about things he likes, he genuinely talks about why he does. The night we met, he showed me how there are things I cannot buy with money, like his stupid smile and muttering. He worries over useless things, things I can do for him. And if you still think I am just playing him like some extra, then I'm the one winning that DMN nerd. Bakugo said, smirking. But he was still nervous. Cause would the lady not believe him? Did he sound stupid, 'cause he just said what came to his mind? When his mother wanted to talk to Kaken alone, Izuku was worried. Sure, he should be pleased that maybe this could put an end to the crazy rich guy's delusion from their drunken mistake, but he doesn't want that to happen. And it just scares him, makes him hope that that does not happen. That they stay married. That Kaken is there for him every day. Kaken's scowl was pictured in his mind, and he felt his heart ache at the mere thought of never being able to see it again. Or not being able to hold his hand, or not being able to feel his arms wrapped around him when he goes to sleep and wakes up. Midoriya. Izuku tends to see none other than Shiro, with Todoroki. Both were running to him through the crowded halls of the police station. Todoroki? Shiro. Izuku asked if his voice betrayed him, showing his vulnerability with its sound of worry and anxiety. Is he being questioned? What happened? Shiro asked frantically. My dad and mom thought I got kidnapped. Izuku took a moment to sniffle. And now she's talking to him alone in the interrogation room. Izuku sighed shockily as Todoroki put his hand on Izuku's back comfortably. I'm still angry you got married without inviting me. Shoto said monotone. Izuku would have argued a very good reason why couldn't, but just then the door opened with his parents walking out first, with Kaken following foot. Izuku was about to go up to Kaken when his heart sank. Kaken had his ring off. Izuku couldn't move. Sure, he would have been jumping with joy for freedom back when he was sure that Kaken was some older crazy delusional rich man. But now? Izuku felt himself being punched in the gut with his head running a mile a minute, yet his mouth was gaping like a fish. Eyes ready to build up a set of tears. Midoriya. Kaken said, standing tall in front of him as he noticed his mom looking away, arms crossed as his father talked to her quietly where Izuku couldn't hear. Give me your ring. Izuku wanted to yell, beg. He loved Kaken. He now could not live without Kaken being there to make his snarky comments or hold Izuku's hand or wake up with in the morning, and Izuku could care less about the money he had. He wanted Kaken, but Kaken had to have gone back to his senses. Now he thinks Izuku was not good enough for him, so that meant Kaken no longer wanted this relationship with Izuku. Izuku shouldn't make this harder than it has to be. It was fun while it lasted. Slowly he pulled the ring from his finger, holding back his tears. Wonders Scorbig, you're divorcing Midoriya? Shiro yelled, making Kaken snap out of his behavior and sneer. I'm not divorcing him, idiot, I'm proposing correctly this time. Kaken snapped, making Izuku shocked. Todoroki rolled his eyes, murmuring about how he should have approached differently than he did. So you're not going to? Izuku began letting tears spill. Kaken rolled his eyes but hugged him comfortingly. Of course not, stupid Deku. He murmured to Izuku gently. Your mom wants us to slow down right now. We want you two to invite me to the wedding this time. Inko huffed as Izuku's father chuckled. Izuku laughed at those still teary eyes. Kaken nagged him for being a crybaby. After that fiasco, life was back to normal. Well, not like before, but sort of like before when Izuku and Kaken were married. Izuku's mom and dad went back home and they planned with Kaken's parents as well when it was the perfect time to set the wedding. Mistuki and his mom got along quickly with Izuku's father and Misuru, which was a good sign. Inko was against Izuku living with Kaken until she finally allowed it after Izuku assured her he would not fall behind on his classes and Kaken promised not to take Izuku on any crazy getaway again, at least not without telling her. Izuku and him were still technically married, but they were at the dating stage, which Izuku will admit was great. Kaken would actually ask him out for dinner or for lunch, then just surprising Izuku. Though Izuku did miss the surprise of Kaken popping up. But luckily or not luckily, Kaken would surprise him with gifts. Izuku would do the same. He would cook breakfast for Kaken in the morning and lunch for his work. Since Izuku didn't know what to give Kaken, Izuku was happy. He was even taking some cooking classes as well. One day though, Kaken got sick while Izuku was in class and he was so worried. Kirishima assured him he was fine and to stay in class. Izuku was too anxious about Kaken to focus, however, till he finally got out of school and got home. Kaken was fine. He was in his bedroom, which was bigger than Izuku's room and had more of a rich atmosphere. Anyways, Kaken was fine. He was in a silk red robe in bed with reading glasses. Turns out he had a stomach ache and Izuku made ham soup to help him. Kaken ate it up happily. Kirishima said he was full and that Izuku should study. Kaken was better the next day. Ochako was upset when Izuku told her he started dating and that he didn't tell her first. She forgave him later when Kaken gifted Izuku's friends for them being his bridesmaids and best men. Izuku was pretty happy. He would sleep in Kaken's room, however, mainly due to him being used to sleeping with Kaken's arm braced around him, making him fall asleep more easily than he did back in college unless he studied for hours, tiring him out. It was amazing. There was a fight Izuku got in with Kaken, however. It was a dumb fight which led to yelling. Izuku went to his bed to sleep. It was not good to sleep angry, but wouldn't you be angry if your husband was coming home late and had a call from a woman who was Kami? A model? Izuku was too upset. Kaken, however, laid beside Izuku in the middle of the night and cuddled close to Izuku, whispering how he was sorry. Izuku was awake, however, and thought of how cute Kaken was. He was able to fall asleep, but in the morning he woke up. Kaken was gone and had left for work, making Izuku disappointed, but he was immediately spoiled when lunch came and Kaken took him out for lunch and bought him a big teddy bear, explaining that the woman was just someone from work he needed to help. Izuku met Kami later on and he figured he had nothing to worry about as Kami was a sweet person who was, well, a bit of an airhead. Other than that, Izuku was happy with his life and could not wait till he could marry Kaken, this time sober. This is Bakuga's room BW. I finally figured out how to add photo now, so I can add references from now on. You know, you can just let him p-. Ochako began, but Izuku shook his head. No, I want to do it. Izuku huffed and closed the ring box shut. Aren't you two already engaged technically? Shiro sighed. The group, Izuku, Todoroki, Ochako, Ida, Tsuyu, and Ida were having lunch in the cafeteria. Izuku had told them of his master plan to propose to Bakugo. Izuku had wanted to officially propose to Kaken. Sure, they were already engaged, but Izuku wanted to show Kaken he reciprocated and have an actual proposal that took place. I already have everything planned out. When Kaken comes home tomorrow, he'll be welcomed to a path full of petals that leads to me on one knee proposing. Then we can eat the food I cooked with his dad. Izuku smiled as Ochako smiled, as well as Ida believed the plan was amazing, while Shiro and Todoroki took a moment to pray. Sure, Izuku was better at cooking, but Bakuga's father was bad as Izuku was before. Yet Mistuki and Bakuga both were weak to their lovers. Izuku was also very nervous. What if Kaken didn't like it, or if he thought Izuku shouldn't have done something so dumb? It all still felt like a crazy dream. Too good to be true. He shook those thoughts away and smiled as Shiro and Todoroki walked with him to their ride. In the car, Izuku sighed, relaxing into the seat as Shiro picked up his phone, talking to someone on the other line. I can't believe it, Todoroki, I'm gonna get married. Izuku sighed dreamily as Todoroki had a smile, which he rarely does. I am the best man, right? He asked, tilting his head. Of course you are. And Ida is the man with the ring. He huffed. Ochako is the flower girl with Mina and Kaken chose Kirishima as his best man, but what if Kaken thinks it's dumb of me to propose? What if he says how dash? Midoriya, Todoroki signed, interrupting Midoriya. He only looks at you like how my dad looks at my stepmom, you have nothing to worry about. Izuku hummed in agreement. Well, when he put it like that, it was stupid to think Kaken would be too upset or annoyed. After all, he always was happy with Izuku's gifts and affection even when he tried to act dismissive. And the way he would show his affections to Izuku trying to be sneaky about it, like hugging Izuku when he thinks Izuku is asleep, or when he would buy anything he knew Izuku would want or craved, or when he would come in by coincidence, while Izuku was studying and would throw Izuku a blanket with snacks. Izuku would do the same but more openly and honest, like last night. Like usually he came in the office while Kaken was working, and he was in the middle of a meeting. Izuku was happy that Kaken muted his Zoom to talk to Izuku, accepting the cut-up fruit bowl he made for him. Before Izuku kissed him goodbye and headed back to study more. Before he would have been flustered, but he stopped feeling embarrassed after a while. It felt more normal to have a kiss on the cheek from Kaken when he would leave before Izuku somewhere for work, or when Izuku would leave for, well, anything. Kaken would do a weird thing of looking sad. When Izuku did not kiss him, he would huff through his nose and slouch a bit. Defeated? Izuku was sure but also not sure, so he started doing it every time he left the room, and Kaken looked very pleased, as Izuku would practically see him glowing with a small smirk. I guess you're right, huh? Izuku chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. I'm just nervous. Shiro knows he would probably get in a little trouble for not telling Bakugo ahead of time of anything, since he always wants to know where Midoriya goes, but he would no doubt let this one thing slide. When Izuku gets home, he will prepare everything for Kaken's arrival. He will propose and everyone will take pictures and cheer and cry. Oki Izuku will cry the most, but still he knows they all will shed at least one tear for this occasion. Then Izuku and him will get married, and Izuku was happily accepting that. Kaken was a great guy and he was hard-working, even making time to see Izuku despite him having such a big job. Izuku wonders if Kaken would one day let Izuku go see one of his designer fashion shows, but then again Izuku did not know much about fashion, so it is probably for the best. After all, he is just happy everything was going right for Izuku. He was not only going to become a great doctor like Dr. Toshinori, but also have a happy marriage as well with the perfect man. Well, that was how he believed it would happen, so why out of anything was he in this situation? I'm telling you, the rope has to be tight, hissed the man with skin dry and with his body covered in green scaled tattoos. He resembled a sort of lizard with his red hair who was adjusting the rope holding Izuku in a metal chair. Making Izuku yelp before the other, who wore a gray mask and overly fancy suit like the lizard man, loosened the rope a bit again. Yeah, and get my butt handed to me for not only kidnapping you know whose fiancé, but also bruising him? No thank you. The second man yelled. Izuku was very unsure how he got here and has no memory as to why he was here. All he knew was right when he woke up? If that's what you would call it, the two strange men were arguing about how he should be tied in the chair in what looked to be a dimmed light bar. The day where he was supposed to propose to Kaken as well. He still had his nice suit on, only it messed up now with tears and dirt. Can you two shut up already? Sighing a deep raspy voice, Izuku turned to see a man with scars all over his face, arms, like he was stapled with rotting flesh. Spinner gets on with it. Twice leave the lizard brain alone. Twice, I began making weird panicking sounds as Spinner began tightening the rope. However, despite him saying to tighten the rope, he did make sure to be careful to not harm Izuku. We are so effed. First sweet Toga-chan, and now we're the next targets after the big boss got massacred. Twice screeched as Izuku only trembled where he was very lost and confused. Izuku gulped as he then felt a GG cover his mouth, and all he could do was go along with it. Izuku was at a huge disadvantage. The only thing he could really do was be angry that he got kidnapped on his wedding day. He was sure Kaken was worried. He was probably ordering people to look for him, hiring the best police, and probably panicking. Kaken, Izuku felt his heart ache at the mere idea of him not seeing Izuku hurt Izuku. What if Kaken thought he ran away again? What if he thought Izuku backed out and wanted nothing with Kaken? Izuku wanted that before, but not now. He loved Kaken. He didn't know why he was here, but he just hoped Kaken or the police would be there to save him. So, a new voice said, startling Izuku. "This is the little wife." Izuku was frozen in fear by the voice. It sounded like the guy hadn't drunk any sort of liquid, and it made his skin crawl and ear tingle by the sharp cracks in his voice. "Yeah, we were able to snag him, thanks to Ioma," Dabi said to make Izuku freeze. That's right, Ioma was there fluffing his curls while Shiro and Todoroki were off getting in their places. Todoroki was getting the cameras while Shiro was getting Kaken from his office, which was on the lower floor. Ochako and Ida were on call with Izuku heading their way only a block away when went dark. Izuku felt himself go cold. He was going to die, wasn't he? He didn't want to die, he wanted to marry Kaken after proposing to him, telling him he loved him. He wanted to wake up in the morning to